while we're in this moment, we can, take this final minute and get our hands raised. We won something, big time stage action, just some vibratory, biological instructions right into the consciousness. What's up? Shake it off. Whew. Like, wow, I go a lot of places. And I'm sure you do too. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to do something very unique, as usual. Even just us all coming into the space is unique. There's been a lot going on the message side of things, but really the message that we see, in the field, as we dial more into just our awareness, and we have so many integers now to go by, mainly ourselves. We've really sobered up a lot. I can say that for myself. I guess I can't speak for everyone, but sobered up meaning that I'm so clear with what is happening and what is needed from me, and when I should be doing certain things, and how I can't do everything at one time, and how I can't know everything. But the most important thing is to know what's most vital for to have the knowledge that's most vital for you to utilize in this moment. And also be willing to move on, and to make sure that one stays in balance, especially when the power checks are coming through. And I will say again that, I'm going through this experience just like you, and I'm using the same knowledge that I'm teaching, and I'm allowing that knowledge to show me more. And, I trust it, because it took me from a life where I was really stuck and I didn't even know it. That's the crazy part. Like, I could have swore I was Mr. Poppin' and I had it all figured out, and something was like, nah, there's a couple things you didn't take a look at, and it was a bit obvious, and it was right in front of your face. And if you didn't see this, imagine what you have not seen yet. I think you should sit down. That way you don't do any further damage. And I was like, yeah, okay, let me sit down. And what I mean by that is that, you really back off the highway of life for a minute, when you're getting into yourself, especially because the overstimulation can be, it could be detrimental. We breathe in and we breathe out, but there always must be that point where, we come into a solo state with ourselves and say, okay, now it's time for me to get myself from being across the street, up in the sky, in somebody else's life, in this personality over here, and bring myself back into this consciousness and start to cultivate my soul. And so I know that the bulk of everyone here is interested in doing that. And as we go forward, I never want things personally, and you can probably see that for the last 10 years, I never want things to really be the same. I feel like that if you challenge the consciousness to really get the lesson and not harp on it too much and then move on, then it actually starts to respond very well to that, because we're people that we're good card players. And I want to say it like that, meaning that if you notice with these paths, it's almost like even with your parents and hereditary things that are passed to you, and the environment that you grow up in, et cetera. It's like dealing cards. Let's say it's like dealing the numbers of numerology, but something more familiar is like being dealt a hand of cards. And now some people will look at this hand, and you got a 2, you got a 3 of clubs, you got some cards that are not matching, and are not supposedly winning hands. But actually, it's really about if you're a card player or not. Like, if you really understand how to work with what you've been dealt. And the most important thing is to, let's say in this state of mind that there's an opponent, to not show the opponent that you have a bad hand. It's like the only way you're going to probably win it is to bluff it out in a certain tense, like, to really take what you have and to cherish it and to feel about it as if it's worth even the greatest card in the deck. And in that way, you will not only win, you probably will win consistently, because some that may have even been dealt all aces and a king still don't know what to do with that hand. And this is what I really believe is happening now, and what we're on the prelude of coming into 2020 is, now that you've actually even been able to pass some cards back and pick up other cards, you've been able to learn your hand personally, learn yourself, and learn more about how you function. We're still in that process, right? I don't think that process is ever going to end. I'm constantly learning things about myself and making adjustments and tweaks. But we're on this path where we're actually doing it, and that's powerful. And we always have to, for ourselves, take a moment to look at that. Like, this was a week where I had to file in all of the files that are generally in my downloads folder and on my desktop in what I call the infinite desktop folders. And that's because I got somewhat of a situation. Some people call that like, I don't know, it's kind of like when you don't like to see things out of place and you don't like to see like particles and dust and all that stuff all over the place, a little bit compulsive when it comes to my desktop. So I don't like to see like a lot of files on the desktop. So the only way I can solve that without filing everything away at every single moment, which is impossible, is I put it into this other folder called desktop. And then once all of the folders and the files and stuff start building up around that desktop folder, I then drop that folder into another folder called desktops. And that has happened actually 5 times before. Now I have like 5 layers of desktop. So I start getting this uneasy feeling. It's like, especially when I can't find stuff and I think that I'm starting to lose my memory, but really it's like in desktop number 3, not completely accessible. And I always think back to myself and said, man, you said last time that you clean all of this stuff, which took you 2 days, real 2 days, that every time you did a project from henceforth that you was going to file everything in. And of course it did not happen. And here we are. So this week was one of those weeks. And then of course I have the laptop. So in my life, it's kind of a metaphor that I can get engaged so much in projects. You know, you're creating graphics, you got files, you got notes, you got everything. And then now a new project is coming and you don't even have time to file that stuff away. It's just like now on top of that too. And then there comes this point where it's just overwhelming. I can't not only find anything, it feels, like I said, it feels uncomfortable. And I also kind of yearn to have everything organized. So I'll spend that time. And that time will be at least 48 real hours. Like for me, like, I mean, what I would normally be spending hours doing something, I'm literally filing thousands of files into folders and organizing the system. And the reason why I bring this up is because as I was filing things in, you know, first there was that moment like, wow, we actually launched a social network again. And we actually really are maintaining a certain level of awareness and growth. And despite the cards that are being dealt, like, I don't know, not being like having this $1 million trust fund or whatever to go into about it, it's happened. And also it's in the wake of so many other things that we've been able to accomplish over this 10 years. But for me, it's kind of like a blur. I guess it's a part of the personality. It's like, once you know you have a lot of stuff to do, you'll keep doing it. And you'll never check back and be like, wow, you got that done. What this also creates is it creates a really critical aspect of how you really view yourself. You always are really more harping on the mistakes that you're making versus the completion of something, because you know you have more to do. And so while I was filing things away, believe it or not, I got a chance to get in the state of consciousness that was a little bit more appreciative of self and what self has accomplished. And that was a bit refreshing because I haven't done that in a while. I realized that we actually hit a major milestone. And of course, there's stuff that still needs to be done. There's things that are already in long lists and organized properly that will be executed. But it was one of those things where I realized that the first layer, and which is kind of synonymous with getting search back going on in the site, that the first layer had been fully coursed in this new wave of experience that we're coming into. And that now that 2020, one moment, please. Now that 2020, no, I'm joking. This is like our inside joke, okay? Now that 2020 is coming around the corner, you know, Captain Ahab is going to have to dive deeper with the ship, is what the ancestors are saying. They're like, okay, so I trust at this point, from scanning the universal consciousness, that we all have the judgment thing down pat at this point. Like we get it. Maybe we're still exploring how to exactly do that in every scenario, or what that means in scenarios that we're experiencing, how to go into this non-judgment, which actually means a lot of things. It basically means just, whether it's good or whether it's bad, you're in it, you know, you're very mature with what's happening and you're regulating the energies and you're on point. You even got solutions. That's pretty much what non-judgment is. Because what judgment is like a stop to like oh man, and I'm going to reflect, I'm going to melt down like a baby, I'm going to be immature, and then, you know, I'm going to complain about it, and then I'm still probably going to have to do something about it, but I'm going to do that first. And, you know, of course, that's neophyte stuff. So we get the judgment, and we also get that all these things are really like small knobs that move great things. Like notice how in the car, there's a couple buttons, like there's that, now they got this automatic brake now, where you just push the button, the brake hits, right? So you can imagine that you have this simple button, but it actually controls some very powerful things. And I feel like that we're starting to get our lives into the awareness that even the simple moves that we're making, let's say, i.e. non-judgment, that'll become simpler once you get to some of the more complex things. But once non-judgment's out of the way, you find like it knocks out all sorts of stuff that was just, you know, being clouded by that lack of reason. But now we have to move on. Like non-judgment, you got it, check. Okay, we got it. It's November 2019. We're all agreeing that we get that. So now, because this knowledge has to come in layers, and this is just what's wild about it, to even try to teach this kind of stuff, because you know that literally at one point you're going to say something that may not apply 6 months later, but you're going to have to say it as if you're under the complete like awareness that this is absolute truth and will never change, if you expect for it to be taken to heart. Okay, because that means that you had to speak with your heart. And when you speak with your heart, you can't speak with like lies. You can't speak with like knowing that there's another side to it, and you're just not explaining that. You can't do any of that. You have to go with it as you feel it. And but then notice how the universe and the cosmos loves kind of making a joke out of the whole thing, meaning that the joke will be on you sometimes, and then all of a sudden you're out there, and then you're, or if you choose to, you're saying exactly opposite. And I think that this is why they actually call it the school of Harpocrates, and where this word Harpocrates, it actually comes from almost like our word hypocrite. It basically is a ode to the paradoxical reality, meaning that because the reality is a paradox, those who are actually coming in like, yeah, you know, I know what's going on and I'm standing on absolute truth, it's all like marching a parade of clowns into an experiment. And they're about to see that actually we're going to learn a lot in this. We're not just going to learn how to do a yes and a no and a good and a bad and even some skills. And there's like no limit to the learning. And the power in this comes with the synthesis. And like I said, the mastery of understanding how to play any hand. So if they deal you some 2s, some 3s, and some 4s, you're like, they like the poker faces, they say, they're like, man, he must have a straight flush over there, how he acting. You even looking at a bad hand, you move more chips in. They're like, okay, he's definitely got something over there. And this is what I feel like also that, and I want to explore more of this region with everyone. And it's because I'm naturally like that. And this is what I really want my 2020 and beyond to be really made of, is where all of the recesses of what exactly is going on inside of my consciousness, and then also the recesses of what's going on inside of your consciousness, meld together, especially in our form of expression and communication, so we together can continuously upgrade and pioneer this quote unquote thing that they're calling consciousness or awareness. And more importantly, while we're helping others do that and giving them information, we also be very adamant about taking certain levels of motivation from that. There are others that are here that enjoy getting that from you, at least at first. Meaning that if you haven't figured out how to run on the sails of the cosmos and you need some motivation, just to understand that those that are here love to hear from you, things that you share, your art, your sayings, your words, your books. Like, I like to try to create as many outlets as I can, and I've been working on this more, to share things that I'm actually looking at or considering in real time. And that's where most of that goes on, of course, is here in ambassador training more than anything. But for all of us to continuously learn something that may not be so easy to learn alone. And I guess that's what I'm getting at here, because what I'm going to talk about today, which is kind of a few different things, but it's really about how since we're moving on after non-judgment and we start exploring the cosmos, let's say the real other entity framework, meaning other energies out here, spirituality as we know it, and to begin to dive deep into self, because like, for instance, here's the thing that always comes up, especially when I'm reading deep knowledge, and I know why this is happening, but the conscious community abroad has not only never really brought this topic up and been mature about discussing it completely, but also we've never moved on to get to what happens next because of that becoming obvious. And what this is about is that there's a lot of records that show that many of the humanoids that were on the planet not too long ago had animal faces. So whether it was the dog face, Xenophaentalis, I think they're called, and this is like so extensive that it's found in several different books of explorers and even people coming to try to bring the gospel of finding this hundreds of thousands, 200,000 dog-faced men or a dog-faced tribe of people, and then having to go to the Jesuit in the Vatican and ask them, should we consider them as humans or animals? Because if they're animals, then we don't need to preach the gospel to them, because animals cannot adhere to the gospel. But if they're classified as humans, then we have to go and try to preach it to them too. So there's literal writing about the existence of this particular dog-faced race. Not to mention, obviously, if you take a trip over into India, you see a bit more of that. You go over into Kemet, you see more of that. You go over into Aztec world, you see it there. So actually, you see it everywhere except for right now. And because I know it exists, and of course, when the third eye opened, which I don't want to bring the third eye into it, because it's not like everybody is privy to a third eye. So when you start bringing third eye things in, that's almost like when you lose most of the crowd. When they say, when you're having a deep conversation, everybody's into what you're saying and they're loving it. And then you say something like, and then with the third eye, you could see it. They're like, oh, third eye. He's still going on about that third eye thing. And of course they haven't, blown it open or figured it out. So you put yourself in a certain position that actually starts casting doubt on what you're saying. So sometimes you even want to remove things like the third eye from your arsenal of awareness just to get on the level where everybody else is at, and then challenge yourself to see if you could still prove what you were saying. So now let's remove the third eye. But we do know in that field, you see people have this different color or a different type of face, sometimes even a totemic type of face. And you do get animal forms at times from others' faces, okay? But right now, we don't look like that. Why? Why? What can you do in what looks like less than 500 years? What can you do in that period of time to all of a sudden make everybody lose their animal features, smooth out, get a nose, get eyes, and even, those still, there's many that actually bear a lot of resemblances to animals, right? But for the most part, it's been completely obscured. What can you really do that with, right? And then going further and saying that, well, the only thing that you can actually do that with, I think there'll be only two things that you can do that with. One, to genetically alter everybody's DNA. First of all, you would have to even concoct, just if you had people that even had different color faces, or different types of faces, you would, if you were trying to change their DNA, even through their consumption, foods and things like that, you'd have to be able to administer whatever it is that's going to change them to all of them. And then also you would have to be able to wipe out any of them that decided that they didn't want that to happen to them. And for me, that just seems like that's too much work. That's too much work. There has to be another way. So then I thought about how when we see a lot of these, especially the childhood movies, in relation to casting spells, and how like a spell can kind of envelop like everybody. It's kind of like the whole thing where, everybody in that room perceives one thing is happening because the person has cast a spell, but everybody outside that room doesn't see it that way. So I thought about that being a possibility. There's a lot of holes in there, but obviously with the use of some very powerful spiritual technology, that is possible. To me, that is the most plausible explanation that somehow we're in a field, which has been admitted, but in a field that is what they would say is morphogenic, that at every single moment, almost like, was that The Scanner Darkly, I think was the series, and also Waking Life, where the face consistently changes, but that almost in real time, that the entire reality around us, who we are, what we're thinking, and all of this is rendering itself. Okay. And now the reason why I brought this up, just to not go on a tangent here with this, is that when we start to really think about what has been possible and what kind of, if you want to say, technology was in use, you would have to understand that not only is that kind of technology available, but that one day it'll actually be available to you. That one day that you could change how your mind functions and put it back into its original state so perfectly that it will click on a level of awareness that will allow you to fully feel that if you have this mammalian brain stacked on top of this lizard brain, stacked on top of this two other different brains, right? And since the brains themselves are the minds or the physi, so then all of the minds, at least from the mammal, the reptile, the lizard, all the minds are all sharing in the same space, but also able to jump into other different spaces that belong into that subset. But then even pull back further and say, and something stack them together like that, then you have to start coming into the awareness of what I like to call the creators or the parents. But from a level of, how like we created our children, right? Like we're their parents. But it kind of brings me back to that joke about this guy calls up God and he's saying, hey, I figured out how to create things just like you. And the God says, oh, really? All right, meet me on the beach tomorrow and show me. So tomorrow comes, they get on the beach. God says, all right, go ahead, knock yourself out. And he says, okay, first I take sand. And God says, hold on, get your own sand. This to me is like what it would be like if we were saying that we are the creators of our children. Because while we went through the whole act and they get like stuff from us, where does that stuff come from? And does it actually belong to just us? Obviously in the collective everything, the answer is, of course, yes. But as it stands in how we look at things in the whole subjective, this is mine kind of sense, does the blood, the cells, the ether, and all of this stuff that is put together to really make this child, does it belong to us? So that's also what we got to realize about the creators or the parents, that they're no more the parents than we are actually the parents of our own kids. If you really look into like who owns that, which is also very empowering, because there's not one being that has stepped forth and like, I own the blood, I own the hair, the corpuscles, I own this and that you don't really see those kind of games. You see them like, you see entities and energies taking possession of the end product. I own him, I own her, those are my children, but never the sub products that are used to congeal or to really create with. Okay. So I'm also bringing this up because now that we can peer a little bit further into the parents or the creators, and I would say the hyperstack, like different types of melding of different kind of beings to create different things, we have to kind of snap into this reality really fast that we should actually have not only the ability, but also the rights to understand more about this form of creation. So this means that we have to get out of all this whack, fake knowledge, these feuds and disputes, anything that's distracting you in the university, basically, and start to really challenge the consciousness to, since now you know that, now you know there's some beings that can stack brains and understand how to keep those brains into matrices and frequencies, how to actually keep them a little bit separate from each wavelength, because I'm sure there's a lizard world with lizard consciousness and all of this going on, and even lizard people. As you know, one of the big revelations has come through about Venus being a parallel world, that everything that's happening here is happening on Venus in real time, and that this Venus is the only planet running counterclockwise, and that everything, even about the 12 tribes of Israel and the Aztecs and the Pharaoh, and even all this connects back all to one planet that actually is like the twin flame. Like Venus is actually the twin flame of Earth, when you understand just that, just that structure. But that over there again, and in probably other ones, there's a you. This is a very close one, but there's a you that operates somewhat on the same mechanics that you operate on here, but somehow you don't really interact with it until you actually go to sleep and you start dreaming into that space, and things become so confusing. And this is why, if you don't have a certain level of wisdom, you can't interpret what you're seeing. This is like one of the deeper secrets. It's like, there are things that you can look right at and just never figure out what you're looking at, because you don't have the wisdom to be able to actually really say, this is what I'm looking at. And this is ode to the neophytes. If you don't believe that, then, it's going to be a long journey. But to the adept, there are things that you can look right at and you just won't be able to decipher it. And then once you get a certain level of knowledge, you can look at that same thing and then be like, okay, now I know exactly what that's about. And of course, there's art that's that way, especially some of the ancient monuments and things, they're that way. But I'm just talking about on the strictly biological, spiritual, and the metaphysical aspect of things, that you could be looking at something and it could be something and you just not even know what it is. And then with wisdom, which is like the level up in the game, you can actually start to perceive what you're looking at. And so that's why what this conversation is really about is it's about getting wisdom. It's about getting a stage of awareness, and let's just say wisdom as itself, from the parents and the other beings that have always been traversing this space, but not getting all of the knowledge and wisdom, because that is pretty much non-applicable. Getting the wisdom specifically that you need to know now. Now, I wrote something the other day, and this is one of those candid conversations, just, us, me and you, me in the tribe. I wrote something the other day on my Facebook, just to kind of keep a notation of it, not so much as to really ask everyone the question, but what was coming across my mind after Tesla unveiled this Cybertruck was once again the replay of the whole power move of a possible potential for us to get what I would say is a clear corridor to sovereignty, okay? Because the world stage, any type of studying will render this awareness. The world stage, ever since, let's say, World War I, the time of the birth of the machines, like the machines, I'm talking about like the steam. See, the steam machines and all of that, they're like a different kind of energy than the computers and the chips and the phones and all that kind of stuff, okay? You just got to read these energies. So like a truck, to understand a truck, a truck's like, it's like loud frequencies and the gas and the smoke and the diesel and the truck driver. And then, I think there was another even reference to the Teamsters, and how the Teamsters, which a lot of people don't really even understand, the Teamsters and the whole story with Hoffa and all that, and what really happened with John F. Kennedy and all that, but that how they really were able to grab the cojones, if you may, of the oligarchs was they was like, but we bring it all to you. The food, if anything that you have, a trucker bought it to you. That was the main statement. Anything that you have, a trucker bought it to you. So if you can't give us the same level of rights and respect and this and that, then we're going to stop bringing stuff to you. So this is kind of like one of the first examples of how you basically, as a David, destroy a Goliath. Because in this time, the wages and all that was basically like slave wages. Like they had gotten everybody on the fiat, but they weren't trying to make everybody rich. This is like the tycoons and the magnates and there's a specific name, they call it the Gilded Age of the US history, which is where they were making billionaires overnight, but it was just those coming from Europe and other places enriching themselves off the resources here. And then all the indentured servants and slaves, et cetera, were building up these industries. They had created these huge monsters, let's say the motors and the engines and all that. They were waging wars. And what was allowing them to do this was they controlled all the oil. The Warburgs, what a name, right? The Warburgs controlled all the oil. And so the power that everybody was using was regulated. And that was pretty much equaling where people couldn't actually get ahead until they drew on this awareness that, but yeah, everything that you're enjoying though, and this society that you have, that you've created, can only function if we're bringing you this stuff in these trucks. Okay, so what I'm showing you here with this is that on one end, there were some that used these machines as a way to try to get control and get rights and create unions and create fair wages to raise more children that had education. So you had that going on one end. And then on the other end, of course, you still had the oil and you had the burning and you had the lack of health and all this kind of stuff happening. And that's like a first massive wave, right? But now in that way, because still, of course, the Warburgs and them benefited, the buses and all that, they all benefited from this oil and this continuous production of oil. And that went unchallenged for now hundreds of years, almost 200 years, virtually unchallenged in that industry. And it's created a certain kind of world because it's very dirty. That's what they say about oil. Anybody who gets involved with it gets dirty, right? So now there needed to be an energy switch, but you know, it's like prying it from they'll be like, okay, you can pry it from my cold dead hands, meaning that they weren't trying to get rid of the oil industry and wars and all these kind of things. Then comes another emerging group. And this is what I'm telling you right now. This is what we're going to see in the future. We're going to see how all this plays out. And it's going to be like an arm wrestling match between two titans. And how all this plays out is actually going to shape the future of humanity. And this is pretty much between these oil barons and their fading power and this new power of solar power and electricity and those who govern that power in that world. Okay? And so let me just explain very clearly that when you see again what Elon Musk and Peter Thiel have done with bringing in the batteries, lithium ion, forwarding the technology, changing the banks system. Remember, PayPal is not like it's not a bank. They had this, they kind of like forced their way in. They can now deal with banks because everybody uses PayPal. But literally, these are like beyond mafia tactics. That's what I'm trying to get you to see here. They appeal to the masses, the truck drivers, the unbanked, the people who, you know, want an alternative, already know the story about who's back there behind the scenes with the loans and the debt-based system and all that, and want an alternative. And they use a strategy where they're like, well, shoot, if I can get enough people on my team, I can go against these big oligarchs, but it's going to have to be a lot of people and it's going to have to be fast. And so this is what you saw with PayPal. PayPal, the .com, and the whole emergence of the internet was the big push against the Warburgs. And I just have to bring this story up again. Many of you heard me explain this story at some point, but I just want to bring this up because it's a big thing about why 2020 and the rest of this future is going to shape out in the way that we choose, because we're really early learning this kind of stage of awareness and knowledge, and all this stuff you can go and check back. So I just want to make it very clear. The tactic is, instead of trying to just fight them head on or even oust them, because even if you try to tell everybody, hey, the Rothschilds did this and they have all these companies and all that, well, that's just what happened in the last 10 years. Everybody disclosed again. But when you look at other societies that were in the coming up in the 1920s and 1930s, when they were already aware of even Nazi Germany's involvement in US politics and all this stuff, they had already done the same thing that we're doing now with conspiracies. Ousting, hey, these are the people who are controlling the world. This is how they're controlling the world. They're using a debt-based system, blah, blah, blah. That knowledge was already available. But see how it came to us, like, because it was new to us, it came to us like, this is the first time the world is figuring this out. But no, that wasn't. So that shows us also that that doesn't work. It works individually. It helps make an individual person aware, and what they choose to do, you know, may vary and may change their life because they have that information. But as a whole, actually, it seems to depress people more and actually even get their ranks, the other side's ranks, a bit more enriched, because people say, oh, I'm going to go join that side then, since I know what it is. So what I'm getting at here is just disclosing the nefarious involvement of those industries wasn't enough to get rid of them. That technique did not work. Only the technique of actually appealing to the masses and the people who are suffering and getting them organized and available to do something at their level worked. That worked with the Teamsters. Now, when we think of the .com, this is what happened, because you may not be able to make the connection. So when this family, and we'll just say this is the Rothschild family, was approached with making investments in the .com sector, this is Silicon Valley, they laughed. There are actual interviews that they still have that you can listen to. And what the joke was by one of the Rothschilds was, so you're telling me that people would rather buy something off a computer screen, an internet, rather than go down to the store and buy it? And they laughed. Hilarious. Well, that's dumb. Because now, if you even think about it, if you're in the room, that does kind of seem dumb. It's like, why would I want to do that? Like, I would just like go and see the real one. I would have it today. So they totally didn't get it. And that was the only real opportunity that they had. And I can't say who else is really back there and what's all motivating. Well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit of the off-world involvements of who's motivating some of this technology. But just in this setting, this was an opportunity for the richest people in the world to become richer and more influential, and they missed it. And in that time of them missing it, it created the growth of now one of the only powers that can go neck and neck with this kind of nasty titan. Because remember, this one uses bombs, it blows up babies, it does it does subterfuge and clandestine methods and all this. So you can't fight this thing like a traditional warfare fight. It has to be something totally different. So an avenue was open and the internet was born, right? As far as we know it, because they took, of course, they took the technology from the military, but it was a simple system about networking computers together, and brought it as a concept of networking everybody together and putting them all into communication. So then Prodigy, American Online, and all these services began to come online, and then eventually saw the emergence of eBay. And ultimately, because eBay used to be its own payment system, you saw the emergence of Xero or X.com, and then this became PayPal. And in this process, you had these minds back there that already knew who the Warburgs were. They already knew that they were controlling the world. They already knew how many years this has been going on ever since the feudal systems and the robber barons, that these were the same people. And now was going to come this moment where we were going to actually be able to arm wrestle with them. Maybe not win, because that's still yet to be determined. You're on the wake of this whole thing. But to actually be able to stand neck and neck, because then this is what happens. So the internet launches and it's a hit. Everybody's using it. And this starts then fueling more money to create things to get on the internet with, right? And this is Jobs' story. This is Gates' story in the development of many of these systems. And I'm just giving a very strange version of this because there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. This is by all means not happening on accident. Deeper minds started getting involved. I even think Venusian minds started getting involved. And I'll pause for a moment just to, once again, remember the overarching aspect of this conversation is getting knowledge that's actually applicable, not getting all of the knowledge, but getting knowledge that's actually applicable. So I'm going to explain just very briefly that there is a strong notation that there was a big turn in U.S. history when the United States had to kind of make a choice of what spiritual side it would take. Okay. And how that was brought to them was, or brought to us as far as information is concerned, was in the form of extraterrestrials visiting the White House. Okay. And what this was about is that on a specific day, two parties, off-world parties, if you may, arrived at the White House to open up a contract or a treaty for a certain term of time based on certain agreements. And I believe that these two forces, which actually seem to be actually coalescing from the same world, one was, I can't even tell you which one's malevolent and which one's benevolent, but one came with an idea of that same old war, domination, basically control of knowledge, programming, pretty much everything you're seeing right now. And then another one came with this idea of like a utopia, no more sickness. Everyone was going to advance to a certain stage of awareness of technology. We were going to get rid of oil. All these different things were going to happen. And that day, the US chose to go with the force that wanted to do the bomb dropping and all this kind of stuff because they had been already doing that. And that those people that came to propose this new way of living for humanity, where they would know more about their bodies and know how to use medicines to take care of themselves, and again, stop the oil and the choking of the plant and all that, they went back home, but they were known to be the Venusians. And that these Venusians, in several times in history, as I can tell you, even from the acts of building Venice, have been continuously coming to this world, offering humanity. Now, I'm not telling you they're the good guys, but I'm just telling you that they are recorded continuously coming here with this technology. Now, one of the last writings up of them was actually in Tesla's diary. Tesla said that the Venusians had come to him and gave him the knowledge of these Tesla tubes, these cables, wireless power, and all this stuff that now we're finding in the metaphysical age to be very useful for lots of different things, okay? But now watch this. I'm just marking certain parts in history that are all very consistent, but remember, there's a lot of knowledge in there. So is it all the knowledge that is useful? No, because it just clutters everything. But if you just take out the valuable pieces, if it's valuable to you, we find that these Venusians talked to Tesla, more than likely gave Tesla the technology. And now here we are in 2019, and then something clicked when I was pretty much forced to watch the Tesla unveiling of his new Cybertruck. What clicked was right away that overarching consciousness that has always been talking the truth since the first engagement we got into years ago said, yo, it's crazy how people can't peep that he's working with the Venusians. And I said, I thought about it and I pulled my instant file system on the Venusians and I was like, yo, that is right, because he had all of Tesla's patents right when they ran out of, right when Tesla's patents came out of the domain of patenting, when they expired. He took the patents, created the technology, then released the patents back to everybody else. Then, of course, this is Elon Musk, which of course is with Peter Thiel, which is of course with cryptocurrency, which is of course with the whole electrical systems that are now rapidly replacing the oil systems, right? And also who is running the bank that is rapidly rivaling the fiat system. So if you can't see this play of the two titans again coming head to head, you would have to be metaphysically blind. And at the end of the day, I would say that even to myself. Like, that's how I work with myself. I'd be like, "Show, you didn't see that. Like, you're a little late on that. You didn't see that one." And I start to work with my conscience and tighten up a bit more about what I'm actually seeing and what I'm really calling important, because this is about the future. This is about the future of your children, the environment your children are going to live in. Also, when you know the future, it's really easy for you to actually go into a beautiful future because you're able to position yourself. It's almost like getting an insider trade deal. You literally know, which I've heard people doing at times, even on certain substances. They'll go in on substances and ask the substance, should they make a decision? And the substance will tell them yes or no. And then they'll come back and make that decision, and they'll profit from it, pressed down and running over. So instead of, again, jumping in ayahuasca ceremonies all the time, just, crying it all out and figuring out what you're going to do for Earth, 8 billion year old, massive creative form, what your little no judgment having is going to do for the big, here you come like hero, and it's not making any sense. And, what I'm saying is, instead of asking to what you can do, what we probably should be doing is tuning in and seeing what it's ready to do for us. Because one of the things that I have figured out irrefutably now is just how a computer works, right? You notice how a computer, it doesn't matter how powerful it is, if you don't engage it with something to do, it doesn't do anything. I'm telling you, the parents are the same way. If you don't come up with something and then be like, so dad, mom, androgynon, can y'all pull this one off for me? You never actually get a ping back. And then also, really, you got to be on some mature stuff. If you come in with a neophyte, I'm just trying to get a car, or I want to, none of that stuff. If it gets answered, you got to even watch out who answers it. But the genuine aspect of who we are and who our ancestors are, when you come up with a big thing and you show them that you're putting it all together and that you're willing, they take interest. Just like now you would start getting feedback, because reality is this thing is on a whole nother level. You can't even really be thinking of your mom and your dad and thinking that's who you're talking to. This thing is on a whole different level. So you got to skip the petty stuff is what I'm saying. You got to come right into the big thing. And you will come into the big thing by just showing thyself approved. That's really how the whole thing is really designed. Show yourself approved. Because see, at times the neophyte, I call these things like basically I wrote it down today. It's like basically the all-knowing neophyte. That's what I call it. The all-knowing neophyte, right? It's just swearing up and down that they know everything, that they got it all mastered, and every blah, 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 blah. And it's comical because on the real adept level, it's like, no, man, you can't even be thinking like that. You can't even be doing things like that. And all of that you're doing, you actually think that you know something, but you really actually don't. And because that's how the knowledge and wisdom works, you will be literally locked out of it and not even know that you were locked out of it. And you would carry on as if you were inside of it. That's why neophytes are neophytes. But then when you get into the initiate or into the adept phase, you're very, very conservative about what you claim that you actually know and figured out, and what you've made contact with and how it functions, all that kind of stuff. You're very more conservative because you know it's real. You don't play around anymore. And you've actually, because you're looking for real results, you realize that this thing is so serious that the more you take interest in it, there's no limit to where we would really see you, what you would really achieve. If you ever conceive what would be like to be with a thoth or something like that, and be just really strolling on some massive level of awareness as you connecting into the overcreation of yourself, this is what we would be talking about. And that's why I started realizing a lot of my message transmutes and transforms, because I realized that not only is it for you, of course, because you're here, but also it's for beings that are going to come later to get this knowledge. And you have to think that same way. What you're creating and how you're thinking and what you're writing down and what you're sharing may not necessarily be for the people that you're directly presenting it to, but it's for those to come. Even within 10 years, there's going to be new children here born, and your book Your knowledge, your awareness, your recording, your video will come into their hands and they'll know exactly what it means. But you also have to speak. You have to speak directly to them. You can't speak to people that you think are not getting what you're saying. And then this is our ambassador training. This is us, continuously encouraging ourselves and learning techniques of how we go out here and do what we do. You cannot go out here and do what you do anymore, speaking to people who you think are not listening. You have to go out there and do what you do because you know what you're saying and what you're perfecting and what you're putting together is going to be for the beings that are coming. They're coming for your knowledge. And this is important for you to know, because everything hinges on this. Because right now, we're on top of something. We're all over it. And it hasn't opened itself up yet, meaning that the real aspect of us diving into this quantum stage of awareness, we're gathering all around it right now and the door is not open yet. It's like a bubble in itself full of effervescent light. And even us being little Siemens ourselves, we're all on the outside, bugs are around the light. And this thing is about to open. And we're all going to have the opportunity to access every single thing. But what will be more important is that you access the synthesis, access what you need, not try to access everything. We're already talking about how manifestation is picking up and how all these different things are happening in the world. But when the system changes, see, the world is getting quieter and quieter right now. Every time one of these big ass old machines, because see, the machines, they serve their purpose. The roots always serve their purpose. They're the foundations, right? But then that's base. Like I said, the base is important, especially if you're working out and all those kind of things. But then there's going to come a time, one of my friends was saying they were over in Denmark or something like that, where they pretty much got rid of all the combustion cars. He said, the whole thing is quiet. He says that even when you walk across the street, you have to make sure you know what you're doing because none of the cars make any noise. So you just get run over and, that'll be the only noise for the day. But if this is happening right now and more and more and more countries are going sustainable, if you may, and they're getting rid of their noise, this is going to take the vibration of the planet into a certain frequency. So like I said before, how this whole thing is going to play out, I can't tell you these Venusians are here to save you. Because to be honest, they say it was more like a story like the V. Right? And there's only a few people that remember the V. And, many people were going to be sucked into it and it wasn't going to be too beneficial for them. While there was a fifth column, which I always subscribe to. There was a fifth column that was fully aware of still, that's just to take the world into this other stage, but it's still polarized. But while this whole opening is happening, we can go straight through. And it's all about timing. That's why we know that this 2020 thing, that it's big. And this is why we're having these conversations. So just listen to this then. So now what we're talking about is we're talking about exploration. Okay? Exploration. Now we have to begin to take these vessels out into the open water or deep water, if you may, and actually fish, dredge, collect, bring forth, explore memories. Look, water is memory, okay? That's the last solution to that riddle, that water is memory. So when you're going deep in the water, you're going deep into the memories. So now it's time to take our vessels deep into the consciousness. Now that we understand the judgments and the ores and how all this stuff is steered with our vessel, now you just basically figured out how it should work and you already got to dive with it. That's really what this is about now. It's funny how the word dive and die are the same thing. You just figured out how it works. Now you're going to dive. Now you got to dive. And I trust that from what you've learned in this experience, that you will rise back to the surface, right? But why do we go deep? This is, again, tied into the riddle of life. Why would we do this anyway if we weren't going for treasures if there wasn't something to receive in that space. And that's why I say now we know that we're going deep into exploration to bring knowledge and awareness and wisdom that is applicable to the time that is right around the corner. And that we're being groomed in itself. Like, I saw stuff that basically said that all of this, what we're experiencing right now, is recruitment for the stage that humans, what we're calling humans, really live on. That this moral bearing and all these different things that we're experiencing is the actual courses to get into the real world where humans really function. This is where the seeds are. This is where we got planted, the planet. And obviously, all this stuff would make sense etymologically, especially as we remove every single thing from the in-betweens that is just like, that's not knowledge you need. And then you just leave what's left there. And then it all makes perfect sense. So this exploration is going to start. Now, you have to know then, you can whip out a quick compass and understand, or understand, as I always say, exactly how much we've really explored the space that we're in. So while a lot of people want to jump off Earth, right, and go to another planet, they haven't even explored Earth yet. And because Earth, and this is where you can sink it in perfectly, Earth is definitely more on the feminine aspect of things. It's parthogenic, clearly, meaning it can self-produce on its own, but it's very feminine with the way it carries itself. And because of that, it allows us to think that we've discovered Earth, especially as from a spiritual level, that being the masculine side of ourselves, is about as much as men have discovered what women can really do. Now, I'll say that again, because these are all archetypes. They're like Russian dolls. Every single part, every single coordination of everything is all corresponding perfectly. So when the mind is working perfectly, you see that we've explored as spirits, okay, because spirits are masculine, straight line, beam, light, okay? We've explored as spirits just as much as the masculine energy has been able to explore the feminine, okay? So we haven't actually gone deep enough yet. And this is also because, one, for each individual, because I'm not speaking collectively here, because even the collective is a bit off on information, but how many people here know exactly how to work simple chemical operations, even with separating and extracting, and what argon gas can do, and what boron does when you mix it with nitrogen, and all that? How much of that do you really know? Probably about as much as you understand about the divine feminine. And this is for a man or a woman alike on this line. That's why it's great to be an androgynon, because you get a chance to see the different aspects of the poles. We know just about as much about our divine mother in all of these different forms of creation and exploration that we could be having here, as much as we also understand that women are so deep that if men actually really even understood the power of what women can do, because they can all sync up. Like when you put like 10 women together, they actually get on the same cycle. Then everything that they think and focus on actually happens because they have the real physical wombs to birth them. Now, are we using women to do that? For sure, in the covens and things. I know somebody asked me a question about that a long time ago. They wanted me to put some negative stuff on it, but we're just saying on the general level, inside of those covens and in those places where those women are already aware, and their mothers were aware, and their great-grandmother, their great-great-grandmother was aware, that's how they use their energy. And that's only the beginning. That's only the beginning of the worlds that they can access and the things that they can do. But how much of that have we explored is what I'm getting to. This is the point. Maybe 1%. Maybe conservative, 5%. So this means that, honestly, also, if you read a lot of these old books, it seems like the most fun that you can have was in exploration. I can actually remember, and this was another thing today, an exercise, and just remember this, mark this down if you mark anything down today. Write down or refresh yourself of the best time that you had. Write down and refresh yourself of the best times you've had, okay? The technique here is when you get alone and you're able to do this, especially when you're laying down, see how long you can think about that and start realizing how that makes you feel as you put yourself more into that space. You bring that space around you, like throw it like an IMAX screen around you, and you put yourself into that moment of the best time that you ever had. Because the reality also is, because of the Ina's direction of the consciousness, it actually only starts highlighting much of what you've done wrong and the bad situations that you've had. Okay, and I want to speak to this very directly because this has a lot to do with the construct. If those want to learn, if you want to learn how to actually move around your construct of your consciousness, you have to realize that every time that you've got into a situation that you would call quote unquote bad situation, every single thing that is formed is grown from what we call and becomes what we call energy. Okay, so meaning that the bad situation was an actual energy. And just like any other energy, it's going to try to survive. That's the first thing I want you to understand. Now, I'll repeat this again. When you get into any situation that it causes a strong energy signature, like you're scared, you're startled, you're hurt, any of those things, energy is created, okay? And just like any other energy, energy is pre-wired with preservation. It wants to preserve itself. It wants to glow as long as possible. It does not want to die. And the only way that it can actually continue to live, because day after day, when time and space are created between you and that experience, it becomes more and more of a fractured code, like a pixelated experience. It's like taking a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy until after a while, you only have these core energy, these decrepit core energy signatures left that actually bear stark, really resemblance to what even happened. But based on how the consciousness functions, the reason why it won't let it go is because it's also in fear that if it lets it go, the consciousness will forget that it ever happened, thus making you prone to it happening again. And this is why I was saying in the ancient times when they talked about these brains, one of the creator beings said, and we gave them our brain. So they can't really get too far because our brains can't go that far. Our minds can't go that far. What was it about those beings' mind that didn't allow them to go that far? It was that. Many of the beings, like the lizards, etc., the lizard state of consciousness, once something happens, it will never forget that. This is also what people can call holding grudges. It will never forget that. And it will never go over there again. It will keep thinking about that. It'll associate that with other things, and it'll start becoming scared and startled from everything. So you see, this is the maze in itself. These are the matrices that we are walking through and going beyond and getting keys to the doors because we understand how they function. Because of course you're not going to let it happen again. Of course you're going to be more wise. Even if you removed it from your consciousness, it can't be completely removed. It'll be always there. But with you holding on to it in fear that it would happen again, it gives it the life as if it was just new again. Okay? And this is the construct of how the brain is functioning and how the minds are functioning. So what I'm also getting at here is I'm getting at that once we start condensing these times in our consciousness that were great times, times we had a good time. And first of all, you'll keep your mind that it likes to seem to bring up the bad times for the reason that I just explained to you. The whole wheel seems to be full of negative things that could happen and what's going on wrong and what we don't like and all this kind of stuff. But we never shift the consciousness into all the great times that we had, right? Because that's the other direction. So that's the direction you need to drive in. You got to start practicing that, because once you get back into that space, because actually the great times, those energy signatures which wanted to survive are stronger than the ones that are the negative, what you would call the negative energy signatures. And also you've used so much of the negative energy signatures, they actually don't have as much power anymore anyway. They're old. So to tap back into that's the state of mind that you can always return to that I was talking about in the other conversation, to tap back into this state of consciousness where you were having a great time. It changes the being. It literally, from the word change, if you ever were thinking, how can you change yourself? This is how you change yourself, because you go into that space and you start teaching yourself how to do this. This is the trance that you can put on yourself. See, because we talk about the trances are always going on. I think that was Dominic that also brought that up, that pretty much everything is some level of a trance to it. So it's really now more of what trance do you want to actually be in? Because when you really understand it, what it really says is that psychologically, because we won't bring metaphysics into this right now, but psychologically, you can actually manipulate yourself to do anything. And I mentioned that before, and it seemed to not have the correct context that I used the word manipulate. But what I was actually saying in the nutshell is that the reason why psychology is so powerful is not just because it can be used to manipulate others. It's actually so powerful because you can use it to manipulate yourself. You can actually convince yourself to do anything if you know your way around your own consciousness. So this is what we're talking about. Now you're walking into the recesses of, well, what is your consciousness? These 4 different brains. You literally have them exclaiming that this is a triune system, and then showing you 4 pictures of 4 different brains. That's quad. Tri means 3, quad means 4. So they don't even update this stuff. It's like, oh yeah, we found out there was 4 brains, but we still calling it a 3-brain system. Then we got everybody referring to the reptilian brain, but we really mean the lizard brain, because the reptilian brain is actually more subscribed to the unconscious. And this is why a lot of mysticism goes on with the reptilians. But to try to confuse what the reptilians are doing for what the lizards are doing would be really what confusing is. Confusing is when you think one aspect of the consciousness is responsible for doing something that the other aspect of the consciousness does. This will be akin to you pulling the wrong tool out at times to try to do something with, and it's just totally the wrong tool. You're like using the lizard brain trying to love someone. This doesn't work out. But once you learn your way around your consciousness, you learn, okay, I'm going to jump into the neocortex, the new core. It's literally saying, since this is like a computer and you got the old processors and everything stacked on, you got a neocortex or a new core processor that you can start using that can regulate all of the rest of the other forms of consciousness. And then that's why I was saying you can't let any of this stuff run off on you and get too far away, especially with the gods, because all of this stuff sits inside of the consciousness. And so when you start working on things and changing things, you're doing that all in here. And as we progress further in this direction, as we continuously go deep within ourselves, it will reveal unlimited treasures in our exploration. And that's what we're talking about here, is now getting the knowledge as we go into 2020 that is applicable. What I'm doing now is I'm working personally really hard on completing something that I don't want to do in 2020. I do not want to be building the website in 2020. I'm trying to get all of that out of the way by the end of this month. So that way in 2020, I can say we have it and be able to show it. And it's just one component to what I need to have in order to get things done for all of us going into sovereignty. But I can't be in 2020 trying to put stuff together that should have been done in 2019. And that's why I have an urgency. That's why also I don't really communicate as much as I could these days with some of my friends and things. Because I know it's like, yo, I'll holler at you on January the 1st of 2020, because right now there's only a small time left for me to make sure that everything's perfect for what we have. We haven't really turned our system on yet. We haven't even done the things that we know would bring millions of people into recognition of what we have, because it's like, well, why do it right now? There's so many things that need to be all put in play. So we've been busy putting those things in play, but that's been because I've been exploring the wisdom that is applicable and beneficial to right now, because this is what just happened recently. This last 2 weeks was a power check. Okay, so let me rewind you to something that one of these master adepts, whether you love them or hate them, spoke on when he first came out into revealing about magic to everybody. And his name is Oberon Zell. Oberon Zell runs the real world Hogwarts on the planet. They all are witches and Wiccans and warlocks. They're unapologetic. And they know a lot of shit. They know all of the entities, the potions, and all this kind of stuff, right? So these kind of people, I just listen to what they say. I don't want to go practice. I'm into the seriousness. There's no more time to practice now. But I listened to what he said. He said, see, when I was young, neophyte, I had this idea that I could change everything and that I could do anything. Then when I started getting a little bit more older, started working with certain things and seeing what was really happening, my ideas changed a bit, but not much. But now that I'm an elder, I see that there are things when they occur, the mages must be aware of those things and must concede to those things. And what I mean by that is that, of course, there is this, it's like a bull-like, ram-like mentality of the hero that they can conquer everything. But the wise man realizes that not everything needs to be conquered. Maybe you could save your energy. Sometimes it's time to love. Sometimes it's time to be brave. You need to know what time it is. And in approaching life that way, starting to realize that there's certain energies when they come through, they're like parents. You just let them storm through. You don't stand in the way. So let me show you how this energy came in for this last 2 weeks. So as the energy starts coasting in, and I'm seeing it on the dream plane, it was very dark, if you could say it that way. It was death. Death moved through, okay? Now, I don't have a reference of any holidays or anything happening like Halloween or anything like that. Who knows if the clock is even set straight with these US holidays and all of that. But death, as far as from the Passover, Sabbath kind of level, moved through over the last 2 weeks. So I'm watching death move through, and I'm fascinated because now that I'm not like death's opponent, I'm seeing, because the mind is showing me death. Like what's happening is my mind, even in the dreams and things going on around me, it's showing me this energy present within nature and present within the dream world, present within certain people, right? And as I'm observing it through my brain or consciousness trying to show it to me, I'm amazed at exactly how well the consciousness can display this. And instead of shutting it down, like, don't think about bad things, get away from evil thoughts, I'm like, this is interesting that you can broaden the spectrum this big. But then I made a joke. I wonder if evil people have nightmares, or if their nightmares are all about love. Think about it. Like, sometimes you can work so much with, let's say, purity, that anything that's grotesque and scary will scare you, right? But for the person who likes that kind of stuff, what is a nightmare like for them? Is that like entertainment? Like, oh shit, I was running from zombies, they were biting on me and everything, like, man. Or is and that was exciting. And then the crazy dream was like, yeah, I was in love with my high school girlfriend. I hate having those dreams. Is that really how it worked with the poles? So basically what I'm getting at here is that as I was watching this energy, because now I'm not afraid of that energy, so I'm able to recognize it and watch it move through, I saw what the energy was related to. Because that's the thing, if you just get afraid, you never figure it out. It's like running out of the temple. You just never were able to figure it out. But as I was there and sitting with it and not afraid that it would touch me, because it's like to die is only to live again, it's to create a force greater than what is even present now. I just watched it move, and then I saw what it was. It was a power check. That what happens is that notice how there's this huge thing with everyone gaining more awareness and gaining more control and gaining more wisdom and all this kind of stuff. But then what always seems to happen is they get a bunch of it and they go mego. They go crazy with it. They start telling people what to do. They start abusing other people. They start imagining that they're more than they really are and that they're not just, we're all regurgitating like dung beetles information that we had from our ancestors. So the reality is that we probably have cracked into only a little of the new stuff. But for those who boast on that they've become so great, a power check moves through. And what the power check was doing is basically it's like limbo. If you are above the line, when it comes across, it's just going to chop you down. And I saw it, and it seemed to somehow also correspond with the awareness of being more flexible also with the diet. And just seeing the air that many are taking with now that they've got something else that now they're going to create as another form of supremacy over others, which is just going to create imbalances for them. See, when the power check came through, because it was like a Saturn energy, it was like a father energy, but it was ordained with death. And so when it started moving through, it was like, get your house in order. And that's like a personal thing to each person. Get your house in order. Because if you're wise already right now, you know to concede. Just step back. It's telling you, check your power, get your power regulated, get more stable. Sometimes when you're very high up and you build this huge spire, you need to crush all that stuff down into something solid in order to build your next stage. And when the power check comes through, it's like if you're still standing up there like the Eiffel Tower, and they already told you that everything needs to be brought low and regulated, then you get knocked down. And this is how a lot of people experience misfortune. And to be honest, I won't say it was as strong as what I just saw as far as being in complete awareness of it. But in the past, years ago, I would always see this kind of energy move around at certain times and wreck people's world. But being conscious of it allowed me personally not to experience certain levels of misfortune. So many times I could say that there are things that we can do to regulate our own consciousness to make sure, because you know how sometimes what you're afraid of the most is the extremes, things that happen that are like everything is knocked out. Now everything has to be started over again. We don't like to have to build and then start over again because the whole thing fell down. The only way for you to be able to do that is to actually be able to give your own self the checks and balances that are necessary to understand how to cultivate and regulate your power, right? Cultivating mean when it's time to bring it low, chill out for a minute. I think they've heard enough. Maybe you need to show a couple flaws. Maybe even you have some flaws. Maybe there's flaws in your work. Let's go look. And you have to be willing to say, yeah, let's go check. Yeah, I see something wrong. Let's bring it all down again. You can't be like a neophyte that's like, oh no, I'm good. Because when one of the bigger forces come through, which is just, it's cosmic. It's like what keeps everything really in check. When the bigger forces come through, it's like an inspection. So you got to be already prepared for the inspection. That's what the adept is. It's adept's already prepared. So Saturn moves through and it's like, what's good, Rahu? I'm like, shoot, everything's good over here and look good, right? You can bounce a quarter off of it. They're like, okay, yeah, okay, let's keep it moving. And that's how it works. But then you can see others that they may have, they're all riled up and then wham, and that's how the lessons work. But what I'm talking about is that if we can bring and continue to bring this kind of level of awareness to our brothers and sisters, we've gained something. And I also spoke on that. But this has to be done in a very careful way because you also don't want to get into predicting, like telling people, yo, the dark energy is about to move through. Because this only sets you up for when they do something stupid and they come back to you, this got me, what should I do? This is too long of a conversation at this point. So, to do something like this mindfully means that what we've been working on is getting these integers in play and actually noticing when the times are shifting, like, yo, I'm seeing a lot of this energy coming through. Is anybody else seeing that? And then having our system so in correspondence with one another. That could be a simple chat for us, but really in correspondence to where once we say yes and we confirm as a group that we see this, then the whole blast goes out to the 25, 30,000 or 1 million people that are with us like, hey, be aware of this. This is what you should do. Never just introduce problems also. Oh, this energy is coming through. Roll it right with solutions. But of course, that takes a little bit more intrinsic work. But I'm just saying that's what we're pushing into at this point, is knowing when the energies are moving through, being mature and adept, not sitting back here like, you know, we just know everything and got control of the whole thing, and then really understanding how to work with the energy. So then that way we learn master lessons, and then we level up and everything is in perfect alignment and perfect balance. And so I wanted to give an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on anything that has been brought forth, or even anything that you personally may want to share. It's been a lot happening again in the space, but I feel so enlightened about just where this is all going and how mature we're getting in the stages that we're reaching, and this level of awareness that we can now revisit many of the things that we know and may have not been the time and place for us to discuss, like these other intelligences that are in these other spaces, or applicable knowledge that actually comes off of planes of where our meditations are, or our use of certain of substances are. And also driving right into the goal of, and how is this going to actually apply to where I'm at right now in my physical life. And so, yeah, let's if there's anything that anyone had to say about, or if you have some questions about anything that was said. I know I bought certain things that may have been some loose ends, or not completely tied up about where that information or knowledge comes from. And I just wanted to make myself available for that. I kind of have with tribe vibes, there's these tribe vibes where it's like me just speaking onto the things that I know that we're collectively feeling, and it's less of the dialogue. And then of course we have the tribe vibes where we open it completely up, and then everybody is bringing input from their levels. So that's what it is.
So, Holmes, I would like to share something. Can you all hear me?
Absolutely, Wholeness.
Okay, Holmes. So, about the nightmares, I had them too this week, with death and destruction and the zombies and stuff. Just before the show went on, or the tribe vibe, I also had a dream with the zombies, but also a beautiful thing happened this week. In the afternoon, I got tired all of a sudden. So I laid down for, I think, 20 minutes, but I became lucid. And in that lucid dream, there was handed me a little baby in my hand by my, well, I thought it was my daughter, but I only saw a little hand that handed me a little baby in my hand, and she put the hand so on top of it to give it to me. So I was wondering how it could relate to the energies that happened in my nightmares and the gift I was given at that moment. I think it's something important, but I can't put my head around it. So.
I mean, it's very important. In fact, I guess the final statement was more of where I left off with just what I was seeing, because I was basically just witnessing an entirely fully functional life of a scene or a scenario where some that had started utilizing a certain type of power started losing control of that power. And I had to go through the entire dream with them losing the control to the point where I was the only one that had control of of my power, while they were going clearly into a monstrous kind of state. And I remember, you know, because of how the dreams work, you really like teleport from one space to another. So I remember in the sky, the energy that they were working with starting to really fill the space so much. But then I came to this field as I pulled away from where they were. I came into this field, and there were all these old women there, and they were all like church mothers. And I told them, whatever your best prayer is, you better start saying it right now. And we all started working with our power to get ready to get prepared for this force that this group had been working with and had gotten out of control, and that they had no longer any control over. And when I was trying to like match that, because I don't always try to take dreams. In fact, I'm very, very proficient at storing dreams and not allowing them to affect my present, and or even trying to connect them into what's going on here. But when I do make a simple query like an ask, so what was that about? What I got back is that there's another world, and this world is parallel to ours. And what was brought back to me to explain that, because, you know, it's, again, we're all having these experiences. We have only a certain type of vocabulary to understand what we're going through. And maybe some of us have a bit more vernacular, if you may, because we've been through different experiences, or read different things. But what was brought up was somewhere in Pierre Sabac's work. I think it's either in the biography that he wrote inside of David Icke's book, or possibly in the beginning of one of his works. He was talking about how he first, and it's funny because Pierre never talks about this, but he has talked about it in his book. But the first time he became aware of this energy that he's talking about on the etymological level, it didn't start with him being aware of it on the etymological level. It started with him being asleep one night and him starting to overhear a conversation that his mom and his father were having. But when he got up to try to get more closer to them, he saw that they weren't actually humanoid, that they were actually more on a reptilian framework. And that actually he noticed that the entire place that he was in was not the place that he was in when he went to sleep. And then he began to realize that he could still see the other world, and his parents were actually in the room talking just like they were in the room talking in this world. Okay, now that was the first opening to the awareness of that there's a parallel. So the other night, around the same time, I'm not sure what exactly I was looking for, but I come across an extensive write-up from an occultist about the pentagram, just laying out the strange values of the connection between Venus and the pentagram based on numbers. Now, we know all this phi and all that kind of stuff, but what we're skipping is like the number 144, which is 1,440 years, which reoccurs often in the cycle. The number 40, which often reoccurs in the cycle, and the connection with even the Mexicans wandering for 40 years before they found the place to actually set up where they built Tenochtitlan, or the main city. Also, in the biblical tradition of them saying that they were wandering for 40 days or 40 years in the wilderness, but this also being actually the same story. And that anytime the number 40 is used, every occultist knows that it's a direct reference to Venus. And that even the horn symbol is because for 40 days during a certain time of the year, Venus curves a perfect horn, like a half of a moon. Venus goes in this pattern behind the sun, and that this is occult days. And that when Venus lines up with Earth, lines up with Mercury and the sun, which happens every 480 years, this is called the Shekinah. And that every time that this lineup has happened, there has been a massive amount of power available on the planet. Now, of course, I went into trying to do any calculations to figure out when the next one would happen, and I couldn't figure out what was the original alignment date. It wouldn't be hard because you could grab anything like the cosmic clock and actually figure out when you get that alignment. But it makes sense then that the amplification of energies like the Venus, Mercury, Earth, and the sun all in alignment brings the Shekinah, of course, being the Holy Ghost or the Sophia or the Holy Spirit, which is capable of doing miraculous things, whatever it is connected to, which I find directly to Venus, as the dove is connected to Venus. So again, as I'm synchronizing this experience, what was really coming forth is that it's basically Venus, that in this next year, something is going to happen that is going to allow many humans, I won't say all of us, because people are on different levels, but to be aware that there's another parallel existence that is running so neck and neck with what we're doing, that when we're having dreams of us carrying out other things. So it's almost like, this is kind of what they summarized it, was like, so Seven, during the time you're awake, you live here. When you're asleep, you live on Venus. And you're not completely seeing what you're doing there. It's like you're looking through a filter, and this is what you're calling the dream. And so everything starts becoming very abstract because you're trying to interpret what Venus life is like through an Earth lens, but the geometry is different. So if you could tune up your awareness, which is not about like even studying sacred geometries and numbers and everything more, but to just be aware of this knowledge, which is these facts about these numbers and this procession and our ancestors. Like, again, the Aztecs built a calendar around this. The United States, the Statue of Liberty, and basically even the 5 and the 6 in the streets is Mercury and Venus. I actually thought it was Venus and Saturn for a long time, because I used to think Saturn was 6, but Saturn is 8. And then when you see all the mercurial statues that are all downtowns and all the Masons built, you realize that the predominant energy they're working with is Mercury and Venus. And then, of course, we're on Earth. So you can't even think that Earth would be excluded from those energies at all. In fact, they would be incorporated directly. So what I'm saying is that what is being shown to us is that we have another side of our consciousness. And instead of it becoming so wild as we could make it, I'm sure it's wild. It's as simple as understanding that we actually have another brain inside. We have several brains, but this one is just like, it's the closer. It's like we probably even have people here that are operating more on this brain, even physically, than they're using other parts of their brains. This is also leads back to the neurolinguistic programming and things that they show in the media, that they're predominantly trying to trigger the lizard brain, not the reptilian brain. They're predominantly always trying to trigger the lizard brain. So if you could make the lizard brain larger, you would make the hive predominantly lizard hive rather than neocortex hive. And what that would do is it would kind of like merge us, what we would normally not be able to see, what would be kind of separated by a veil, which we could only cross when we deactivate this consciousness, which we do when we go to sleep. Basically, it would merge. These worlds would start to merge. And, you know, again, these days I like to keep my message very sound because I know I've already introduced quite a bit and people are still digesting stuff. But that's why I have the tribe, because you're like basically the only beings that I can talk to and tell you about and agree with, because, you know, we're all having these experiences that, yeah, yo, I'm not a dummy here. And I'm telling you that there's another planet, what we would say is virtually next door, but next door is really actually a corridor in our mind. And that the activity from that planet, from whatever is going on over there, whatever they're doing, which I suspect has a lot to do with the occultism based on how many times they keep using this symbol. So it's like not even like subscribing to it yet, but just taking notes like, okay, so Buddy's coming around here with all these vectors, which I know the vector base in polygonal systems is really Venusian stuff. It's like when you see vector based technologies, this is like the V itself. That is why there is a V in Venus and there's a V in vector, and there's also a V in vagina. So the reality is that you have so many signs. To ignore these signs would almost be in itself a form of programming, a deep level of programming. So meaning to ignore pretty much the facts that these planets, not even just because that's Venus right there, right? And we're saying, okay, there's something's going on over there. And then we got the moon. And the moon's always up to something and always bringing in certain kind of energies. Like each moon, this was the kind of, I always try to just demarcate as the moon, because before I even knew it was new moon, the energies were already coming. And then Jeanette had remarked, she said, hey, you know, it's new moon today. And I said, well, shoot, that would subscribe to that dream that happened last night, which was the most intense of the sequence of dreams that I was having seeing into these spaces. So to answer your question, as best as I can, for me asking the question to myself and to the higher self, which will always respond, whether I want to believe what it's saying or not, it was just saying, because this planet over here is about to come online, as far as you being and many of the beings here being aware of just how connected we are with that. And it didn't stop. It didn't even let up. Then it started bringing back around again the dog-faced beings. Okay, so this is like, again, when I say it didn't let up, what happens with my consciousness when I query it and it tells me something, it doesn't want me to just take its word for it. This is, again, me placing myself outside of myself and asking myself a question, which is a technique. So I can identify higher self, ask the question to higher self. Higher self then responds, but then we'll query all systems and just bring back consistent knowledge. So then it was saying, so also remember, Venus is associated with the black dog. And you can't seem to connect where that comes in because, you know, you got Sirius, which is big 5, which is the dog. You have Mars, which is like a Cerebus, or it has an area that is also corresponded as a 3-headed dog. But, you know, in the ritual of Venus, which you still haven't been able to sync completely, in the ritual of Venus, there's a black dog involved, okay? Now, it's highly possible that this black dog is none other than Anubis, so that Anubis is directly connected to Venus. But then you start finding an alarming amount of knowledge that basically states that it's almost like what we're calling a dog, the head to the tail is more of like the snake. And this is where it would take you to have a good degree in biology and understanding the chemistry of the body and that kind of thing to understand the connection between the dog and the snake. But that, like, it's like the dog is like an evolution. It's like this next stage of evolution that a reptile will go through before it even gets to what we would call human, which is like a chimera. And that these dog beings, basically, even the ones that they're saying were existing on Earth, are also Venusians. Now, you can also see that the Queen of England is heavily affiliated, not only with Venus, but also with dogs, period. Like, their whole thing is dogs. And in fact, I would just say, even for many of my melanin recessive brothers and sisters, their connection with dogs are very strong. But then they're specifically referring to this black dog. And the only person I ever saw it really exhaust that topic is no longer with us, and that was, of course, Bobby Hemmett. And what he said about it was that the Canaanites, which were seen to also be melanated, also were a whole race of black dog men and women. And that in the rites of Venus, that is why the black dog remains there to this day. Now, of course, all of this would become completely obscure if no humans had animal faces anymore. Also, what is very clear is it's not just black dogs living on Venus. It's not just reptilians living on Venus. It's a certain part of the consciousness. And this is why I'm still trying to sync this up. And the closest I've been able to get to this is the difference between a nocturnal life form versus a non-nocturnal life form. This was the closest that I was able to get, because I saw these nocturnal life forms as being heavily engaged with Venus. It's almost like Venus is like a nocturnal planet. So not only was it the moth, it was also the owl. And Inanna, which is basically Venus, she has these feet that are shaped like owl's feet, that she's basically an owl. You even see owls next to her. And then when you really dig into the occult and get where the symbol of the owl comes from, which is what Giordani was cracking apart, because he talks about these ancient writings about a visit from these owls, right? And then now if you think about even the gray phenomena, that whole ET, all that with Hathor and all that all seems to, in Bohemian Grove and all that, the owl surrounds that whole mythos. And what this is about is, just to crack it so you don't have to go read all this stuff, is that basically that there was this female being that was like a big moth, like a moth owl. And that the form in which it could communicate was on a whole nother level, because like it like what you would say is an owl has with sonar. And so basically what you were dealing with is like a massive chimeric kind of mother birthing being. And this was what Venus really was, or at least one of her daughters. And that Earth in itself is very entwined with that. Also, lastly, that other group that I was telling you about that just said, let's keep dropping bombs, seems to be more connected with the Saturnalian Anunnaki aspect of the angelic system, meaning the ones that are still like, let's just wipe everything out and start over, which is what Israel is representing. which you can even see in the politics. That's where the United States sat its claim at. Like, it's like protecting Israel. It's the beings that Israel is calling in and working with that have a lot to do with the hexagon and that symbol. That's the ones that they end up signing up with. And those beings, per se, they're not as like, basically they're trying to cleanse. They're just trying to cleanse through massive death, basically, just try to wipe out the species completely. So I had a little bit more to lend in there, but the reality here is that these are forces that are residing within our consciousness. So the biggest role I feel like we play in all of this is if we can bring these forces to balance within our consciousness, it would be very similar to what happened with the cat. The cat is a blend of two different life forms that don't get along, but now they're in the same body. And now they are using both of their techniques, from the being fast, like the cat is very fast, but you can also cuddle with the cat. It's like, this could be a friend. But you got two different forms. You got, because a cat, of course, I mean, a cat is a snake and what you would say is a lion. And it's both of them in the same body. So they're both functioning on that same brain. So the human is also in those kind of categories, but way more advanced. Now you have 4 different kind of brains stacked. So if you understand just from the archetypical level, like, what is the architect doing? It's trying to merge all of the consciousnesses that feel so foreign, however long this takes. That truly, what I'm witnessing, if I stand in the sky and look at it, is that even for us now no longer looking so different is an act of keeping us out of wars. Because the more you look like something else, the less you are able to accept another's customs, thus their knowledge and their memories. But the more, from what I've experienced, and as a Black man, it's a road uphill to try to remove yourself out of racial programming and stereotyping and all these kind of things. I feel like that is one of the greatest feats that will go untold as far as in my life, especially from my background. But in seeing the whole thing and coming to terms with it truly, what I see is the massive thing, the big show is happening only for those that realize how to put all of their consciousnesses and the parts that war with each other into balance and actually be able to see through a perfect lens. So that way, like I said, the distortions that you're even seeing in nightmares, I'm not saying that things that we call negative are not happening. I'm just saying that what adepthood is being able to be aware of what that is and how it connects to the big thing, rather than assuming that a mistake is being made. And the reason why I say that, meaning like assuming a mistake is being made and that this is not perfect. And the reason why I say that is not only from not only me myself, but any of my other friends that went really deep in on a journey, especially if they were using certain substances on a prolonged period, when they broke all the way through, they only could see perfection. And the more they started coming down back into the distortions of their own realities was when the imperfections were being introduced. But they left with the lesson of knowing that, my child, this is perfect. It is you that needs to understand what that perfection actually is. So perfection is in this tense, not something that you need to try to achieve. And this is where, like, I was in the shower and this was going on in the shower, all these thoughts. And it was like, I'm coming in here to tell you, Seven, that you're already at a place. You're at a place that you're looking for. You're at a place that you're trying to get to. You just need to stop and now look around you. And I went to write that down because it was like a one-liner. It literally said, you're already at where you're trying to get, something like that. But it was something to share with everyone here. It's like, we've made it now. You can't keep working your consciousness in a way that you feel like you're still trying to achieve something. Because truly, what I also learned with the vegetarianism is how we're really structured at first, especially in the neophyte initiate days, is you do things to get certain results. I'm fasting to get this result. I'm removing this from my life to get this result. But actually what's really happening is you're doing something so that you can tell your mind to equate to that's why you should be able to get this result. So if you could just remove that whole component, which is actually not necessary to accomplish everything. If you can remove that component that you actually need to do something to accomplish what you already are, you would click into it. But it's going to take you a while. That could take a few years. That could take a few months. But you need to get on your way. And this is what was translated to me, you know, and that's what I'm translating to you, is that you get on your way because you're actually mixing both sides of your brain. You're using all of your consciousness. You're not just whole body breathing, you're whole brained now. You're completely whole with your consciousness. You're not trying to have the argument about the difference between the mind and the spirit, as if when we're done with that conversation, we had grown any from that, unless we were really doing some kind of experiment that required that. If we coalesce all of this force and realize, yo, we have a lot that we can gain here, and get out of this, just this polarized I-ness, and even the other side that either wants to be by itself or just be everything, and stick in the center of the consciousness, then you would be able to explore this vast chasm of all of these different things. Just like when they unearth something, they keep bringing up these crystals. You love them. They keep bringing up this gold. You love it. But to go inside of yourself and to bring up the same equivalent or greater, how much more would you be in love with that? So that's what I said. The way to that, to open that door, is just to remember when you had a good time. Now, if you ain't never had a good time before, you got some work to do. But if you've had a good time before, put yourself into those moments. Go to sleep in those moments, and you'll be surprised what's like. I was doing it in the chair, and all of a sudden, see what you think what you could do this. You could have did this and realized this 6 months ago, a year ago. But if the gateways are not aligned properly, yeah, you're a little early. You're like an early fruit on the tree. To do this at the specific time that it needs to be done, which is what I was saying, like having the right knowledge just at the right time and then being able to let it go when it's no longer applicable, that's where you really want to be, or that's what I suggest. And so in this time, find that space. Find that space where that was the best time you had. I also noticed for men, it seems to always include women. I won't say for all of us. And I'm not even saying sexual. Like, I actually remember, like, early in life where I held a girl's hand for the first time, and like the whole thing that was going on inside of my psyche. And I said, you know, it's interesting because after I put up about 3 of those, I always noticed the female was present. And I felt like that was symbolic for me, that it was showing me that the best time that I ever have in the cosmos, because I don't think this is the first time the cosmos has seen James Evans Bomar III, that I learned over time that the best engagements come from exploration of diving deep, and that my life had started centering itself around traveling through these paths and traveling through these wombs and wormholes. And I feel like all of us, of course, are doing that, male or female alike, that we've started jumping down these wormholes and wombs to go through these experiences as deep divers. And that this exploration, though, is so intrinsic, it's so organic in itself, that if someone starts making you become disgusted by it and reject it, you die. Literally, you create this thing where you stop moving. To me, that's, of course, what death is, a slow down of the vibration. You can't stop it, but it's a slow down of vibration. So it's like feeding your consciousness this idea that you need to stop piercing through all this and stop experimenting and exploring. But you actually still need to remind yourself. You need to remind yourself from time to time, especially if we're going through yugas, think of the best times you've had. Fill yourself with that energy. Let that fill the body and the being. And then from there, what happens is like this. When you were younger and you were doing the make-believe, you remember the make-believe? Anybody ever done make-believe? By show of hands, you ever done a make-believe? Are you still with me? Are you there? You do a make-believe before? See, what happens when the child is doing a make-believe is they believe it's going on. If you ever watch the child, they cease to start tapping into what's going on around them. They could take two inanimate objects and be like, oh yeah, I'm about to go to the store today. And also they can write themselves into the script as anything. I'm the president and you need to listen to me. And when you watch children do this, not adults, because see, with adults, even when they make believe, they're playing make believe. Now they're even looking around to wonder who's observing them make believing. And the problem with this is once you do that, you take a percentage of yourself and you put that percentage of yourself over there. Remember how I used to say sometimes that I'd be sitting over there and listening to myself? Because I would have to observe myself in order to understand what I'm saying and how to become better at saying it, etc. But what I'm doing, that's beneficial. But what I'm also doing is I'm dividing the amount of how much of me is really present in this moment, okay? So now, see, when you're younger, of course, your manifestation thing is on fleek, it's happening, but you're still before the age of knowing. This means that there's certain powers that really are kind of off limits because it's almost like you're given a Ferrari in a time you should just have a three-wheeler. So meaning the cosmos, even though in make-believe, you can literally put yourself into a level of power that if you can tap into that same moment when you're an adult, you would be able to exhibit great strength. So this is what I was saying about how we're bred out of being manifestors, because if you kept playing make-believe and not paying attention to everything that's going on around you and being convinced that it's not real and it doesn't exist, you would be better than anyone that did The Secret. Because they're now trying to put you back into a stage that you already were at. And the reason why you can't get to that stage now is because you're looking at other people and you feel embarrassed. Even when other people are not even around, you playing make-believe with yourself, you would police yourself from another part of your consciousness that'd be like, man, what are you doing? But make-believe in itself is what we're talking about, because now if you went into a session of make-believe and you put all your focus into that point and just had what? Fun. That's why fun and happiness and jokes and that kind of things, those are the perfect transients. That's what they say in psychology. Those are the perfect transients for creating change. You don't find people really changing in serious environments. They change when they're having fun and when they're laughing, and that's when the transformations are taking place. So to put yourself into that state, and that's what I'm saying, it's like just knowing all of this stuff and then applying it from a wisdom level is a big key here to our growth, because we keep thinking sometimes, well, if it was, well, children play make-believe all the time, but they were manifestors. Now you're overthinking it. You're outthinking yourself. You shouldn't be able to manifest certain things at that age. It would be too much. It would be too powerful. You'd be a freak. But now you need it. But you won't play make-believe anymore, so that you can remove yourself from being in all these third-party positions, watching yourself, and because you only can manifest great things when you're completely there. It's like anything that you're working on. If I'm working on a piece of art, it could never, if I'm distracted, it's never going to look the same way as if I'm focused. So this is what I'm talking about. And right now, we're focusing on this exploration and how to achieve it. We are actually bringing, again, the fuel supply from your own repository. You have a memory repository of good feelings that you haven't tapped into. And when you have that good time, don't snap back into the, well, that person didn't allow me to, and I'm so sad that they're gone. That's not what I'm talking about. Don't go there. You always go there. I'm talking about go to that moment. And then in that moment, you have that code, because remember, this is a code. People think it's a game when we talk about the codes and we say, yeah, your reality is a code. They're like, it's a code. Like, I guess, he's trying to see it like a computer. No, it's really a code. It's like when you snap a picture right now, this meeting and everything that we're having, I'm snapping pictures at about 60 frames a second, and it's storing it in my mind. But of course, just like any other hard drive, there's compression. It's got to compress it, because I can't keep every single slide of 60 frames per second inside of my mind. So what am I going to really remember about this conversations? The high points. Now, are the high points the whole conversation? No, but I'm going to store the high points. And tomorrow that storage is going to get compressed a bit further because of the new memories I'm going to bring in. And that's going to keep happening until either I'm going to think I forgot about today, or today's code is going to be so corrupt, I'm not really going to be able to access more than just a blurry picture. And this is why when I say remember your good times and recall them, you see, they don't actually appear like blurry pictures. They don't actually come into the field as if you can't remember what's happened. They come in crisp. And that's why it's a clean code, and the code has energy attached to it. And when you start just loading that code, this is your own stuff, loading that code continuously in place of that code that constantly wants to highlight what you don't like about the reality, etc. This is how you empower yourself. And with that power, then you would be able to go into make believe. In this case, it's make know, because you know what you would be doing and manifesting. And then it is through those conduits of exploration. So there's a path here, there's a purpose here, exploration, because the more fun it is from the new things that we discover, that's what keeps us going. So the reason why you would want this to work, because some people are like, well, why would I want to do it anyway? Well, you got infinity. So you need to set this in a certain way where it would keep panning out for you through infinity. It's not even somewhat of a desire. It's a responsibility. It's a responsibility to make yourself happy. You see how all this is, it's wild. Even as I come into this recollection of these kind of things, I'm blown away. Hey, it may not be impressive for you on your end, but it's doing wonders for me. But again, just realizing that we feel like it's a responsibility to go to work. I feel like it's a responsibility to keep cranking it out and keep doing all these different things that I can't say is necessarily what I would want to be doing all the time. There are things that I would be able to classify as fun, but the responsibility is lying within doing things that actually are a bit more grievous. We have to make sure that we're carving a space for the responsibility of us cultivating the good times. And remember, you don't even need to go out there and try to find a good time. That's not the first exercise. The first exercise is to research through the consciousness and bring the files of the good times up front in the brain again, and then begin to function that way. So someone has a question. Let's get these questions answered. I think that this is going to be it in 15 minutes. I know we've kind of went on. I'm not sure. I can't go to sleep today anyway. So, you know, I think we're on the waxing of the moon. This is going to be a powerful full moon. But yeah, I think Clarence has his hand raised. Brother, if you wanted to say something,
Honest. Can I go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all this knowledge. A lot of things that you just said, like really clicks. And I have the feeling that it's happening at the right time as well, because I'm here with Brother Sven, and I'm about to, let's say, take a journey, like the inner journey. And what I was like actually doing before this was, I had a moment with myself where I had to like analyze my life in terms of where I am right now, where I'm coming from, and what I actually want for myself and my family and surrounding and tribe, and like everything that has to do with what I'm like, let me say, in contact with. So I've never like done what I'm about to do consciously. Unconsciously, I feel like I've done this a few times with dreams and like even when being sick and things like that. So my question is, I feel the synchronicity because things actually played out in such a way that I'm like, we're like having this meeting before the journey. So my question is like, what advice can you give me in terms of going into self and humbly humbly and like, let's say with integrity, asking questions, but coming from a space of deeper understanding, and also from a space of knowing that like you don't actually know everything, you know, and the thing that you need to know is only applicable to the now actually. So I don't know, like, what advice can you give me on this before like indulging into this journey of self?
I think with such things, the best advice is no advice. It's almost like when I was about to go on my journey, they were like, "You want to watch a video?" And I was like, "No, I'm good." Just the last thing I want to see is a video about the journey I'm about to go on, and that's just real talk. And you know, I guess if I could say anything, I always remember my breath. Like the breath is so powerful. To fully go into a relationship with breathing should be at least in the top 3. And what I mean by that is that we feel what the power of breath is doing even when we get into certain stages of meditation. But when we get in journeys, breath reveals to us why it feels that way. And I personally feel that that's a lasting effect. Like it's a liberating effect, because it cracks the whole idea that there is a need for something in order for you to feel loved, in order for you to feel that you were gifted with something, and because breath is still free. And so that's what I would advise is to keep breathing, and that you're in the best hands, like Allstate anyway. And you know, as a private group, I can only advise on certain things anyway. But I would say just as that, and that everything is always synchronistic, because this conversation could have been about anything today. Like there's a lot of stuff, like we still would need to be getting back into seasonal diet and stuff like that. But this was really what was coming through the portal, as far as the force that we're all connecting to and saying, this is what now we're going to go into. And I'm like, okay. And now that is synchronistic with what you're dealing with and what you're experiencing personally in your life. And so, to be honest, you're getting all of those answers. And you're also, if there's something that you're not clear on, that's for sure for a reason, because that's definitely not the space where you want to have too many conceptions about what exactly is going to take place. I could never say there would be a greater spoiler alert than that kind of thing, with someone trying to tell you about what you should be doing, especially since sometimes the same faculties that you're using now in order to be able to comprehend are not readily available, and attempting to try to grasp them produces its own phenomenon, rather than, you know, going and adapting to what it is that you're using now as a form of communication. So you'll hear me in there, and that's pretty much how it all works. And yeah, brother, so definitely do your thing. And I know everything that's being said is synchronistic. I wanted to speak to one thing also too, that came into my consciousness while you were talking, not necessarily saying it's directly related to what you're speaking on, but okay, it's actually about alcohol and what exactly spirits are in that context, right? So fermented rye, fermented barleys, and what this does to the consciousness, right? So I would definitely say that what marijuana probably does is it probably opens up more of one side of the brain, right? And then I would definitely say what alcohol probably does is it probably opens up more of the other side of the brain, okay? And this is not encouraging the use of any of these substances. You must be a master or ride a dragon. So the reality is, though, is that I started noticing how when you go into, let's say, the alcoholic kind of thing, when you start drinking, you go into this I-ness, and this I-ness seems to pump up the confidence, because the I-ness is connected to the ego, right? Versus, let's say you smoke this big joint and you start thinking of all these ideas and thinking about what you can do for the entire world and all this kind of stuff, right? So clearly that's another side of the consciousness, right? And I started thinking about how that, because I just got another memo about how what the indigenous were doing. I got to get with Timothy over there about this. Was they were mixing Mucuna pruriens with cacao, and it was Mucuna pruriens and cacao, and I believe there was one more element, but I know these two specifically. And it's because what these two do together on a chemical level works wonders. Oh, it was mushrooms, macunapurians, cacao, and a mushroom. Okay. And these three together was like the way to get into the world in which that they were accessing, and also to be able to access that world the proper way. And what I was want to get at here is that notice how, and they were just using alcohol as an example here because everybody's familiar with it. It gets like this bullheadedness. Well, not everyone, but most people. It gets this bullheadedness where it feels like that you can actually beat or whoop anybody, and that you're willing to really endure and go through anything at this stage while you're drunk, right? So they call it the drunk courage, right? But now imagine that there are certain elements that function that way, but not necessarily that they're alcohol, but they function that way when you're taking them in combination with other substances, okay? And they give one it's not courage, it's actually like a soundness, a stability, basically it's even almost a lack of thought, a lack of thinking about, oh my goodness, it's gonna be dangerous. And it's more like, imagine a person that is drunk in that same situation. Now they're not scared. Now they don't feel like something is going to happen to them. But this is all aspects of what the elements can do when they're combined together properly. So that came up, earlier, I think it was yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure I make it a part of this whole recording, is just to remember that the consciousness, because all these are elements, right? And these are elements that are even found inside of your body. So you can even replicate these elements on your own and not even have to actually utilize them externally, but that does take some leveling up. But just to be aware that even when we feel what we call fear, this is none other than a improper chemical exchange. Because when the chemical is actually exchanged properly inside of the body, there's really more of like a going into it than there is a retreating from it. And so I just wanted to, put that out there. I didn't, not sure exactly what that pertains to, but it could pertain to quite a few things. But just remember that, sometimes the consciousness is like, oh, what am I experiencing? What's going on? And that's actually more of a chemical imbalance and a lack of us understanding and sustaining ourselves completely. And being able to grasp that probably would allow the body and the mind, the consciousness to balance out, because it would produce the chemical that would be capable of allowing it to be aware of that. Sometimes I think that they call those inhibitors. They take off the inhibitors. Excuse me, there's a lot of terminology around it. But it's just, again, the awareness that there is that courage, the chemical courage that is coursing still through the body, through the nervous system, and through the spine. And so one doesn't always have to allow the brain to dominate the state. I'm afraid, because I haven't experienced this before. There's one side of the con, man, let's go. This is fun. You see what I mean? So just remembering that it's all in the control of the referee. I also wanted to hear what our brother Jeffrey had to say before we adjourn here. We're about 3 more minutes into this. I know it's got to happen at some point. I know we ride out. I'm sure there's folks on the line like, okay, if he stops today, that'll help. Just to digest. What's up, Jeffrey? Wholeness.
Hey guys, what's up? This is a beautiful conversation, by the way, and I'm definitely going to have to sit and just meditate through this whole thing again. So yeah, it's very interesting stuff has been happening with me lately, and I want to comment on the dreams and Venus, and just get all of your eyes, everyone here, and especially Seven, get your eyes on this, because something really wild has been happening to me. So I'm on day 73 now of semen retention. And it was back at that point to where I had, through the dreams and things like that, I had realized that my brain, because of the way the neuroplasticity of the brain works, my brain had been altered from 16 to 18 years of using pornography. And the more that you research it and how it actually screws up the dopamine receptors and the motivation, I realized that this was very much connected to the illnesses that I had been experiencing. And so once I actually made the connection and because at the level I'm at now, I can just be like, all right, never again, never going to do that again. And things began to change very rapidly. Because I've done the retention before. You notice the benefits, the muscle, the strength, the motivation, the female attraction and all these things that people talk about. But this time was different. I began to actually experience pain in my sexual areas. I began to experience pain like deep in my abdomen when I would see a beautiful woman. And then so as this just kept going, I was actually getting stuff done that I had never accomplished before. I was hiking mountains, I was going to hot yoga, and this is coming from someone who had been stuck in bed for years, like literally, chronic illness, seeing, 40, 50 different doctors, taking every supplement, every medication you can imagine, almost died from opiate overdose. So I'm going through this process, and I start having wet dreams. And the first wet dream was I was in this memory of myself, my older brothers who were introducing me to pornography when I was younger. And so I made the connection there. I was like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like this is, things are beginning to clear up here. And it just kept going. And it's at the point, I'm on day 73 now. I'm having a wet dream about once every 10 days or so. And last time it was two. It was 2 in one night, but it's not to where I'm actually, releasing the sexual energy. It's more of I'm having a full body orgasm in my sleep. And, I'm waking up and nothing's changed. And it seems that it's always happening after a moment of where I have an accomplishment of when I go on a hike and I get to the top, and it's, this was something I told myself I couldn't do for a long time, for years, like I need to accomplish that. And I did it. And then that following night, it would happen again. So it's just, a lot of connections being made here. And I know Mark was saying that this, these are a way that the body is protecting your energy, because I can see how you were saying where it could push you down, or you would actually need to squish this down to create a foundation, because I could get all, that sometimes you get on that confidence scheme, but, fools rush in, right? And you need to create that foundation. So I can see how this is kind of keeping me in check, because I'm kind of just like a bull about ready to be let out into the arena, just kind of like hitting at the gate saying, hey, just let me out. But so it's just something weird for sure going on. And just wanted to share that and get your eyes on that and how that's working with the dreams.
Well, for sure. First of all, thanks for sharing. It definitely allows us to continuously keep opening up the space and to allow others to feel comfortable with, discussing whatever they're experiencing, because that's really what Tribe is all about. And with semen retention, the only thing I could speak towards this directly is that obviously the consciousness knows, more about what's happening than sometimes the subconscious knows more about what's happening than the conscious. And what was talked about in Ayurveda was very similar to how there are parts of our body that do need to drain from time to time, that even the actual reproductive system for the male and the semen retention, that there were times in which it would drain itself. And this is almost like how all the organs work, is that they have to drain themselves from time to time. And what you find is that the actual fluids, as I was talking about the OG semen, that was the joke I gave, but the actual semens that actually become more cultivated and actually don't die off in the process of the cultivation move further up into areas where they're actually no longer able to be ejected from the lower channel. And so this sometimes appears as a bulge in the top part of the navel. Sometimes a person doesn't have that necessarily. Also, sometimes there's a pain in this inner area until that, let's say it's a tube, until that tube opens back up to allow the semen to actually be able to go back up that channel. And actually where that pain actually starts is in the lower back, like right where you find that kind of like that hole where your tail would be, which they say is like the entry point somewhat to the root chakra, that area will actually be sensitive to the touch, because the semen is actually accumulating back there, still pushing at that valve, if you may, in order to gain access into the Dantane. And so I would just say, stick with it, brother. Like, the reality is that all the experiences that you're having are normal, because obviously the body will know how to regulate its channels, because for us, because this is the thing, every time you go like hiking or anything that builds up a lot of breath, like if you play, like football players have to deal with this. This is what they call testosterone. This is what they're talking about. So anything that you start doing, even if I'm lifting weights, if I'm breathing a lot, and I'm like running and all this kind of stuff, I'm far more sexual after that than I would be before then. And it's because all of that, all those liquids, all those fluids and everything is like, it's primed. And now, though, if another way to actually pass that essence into something else is through creation, is actually through having something that you're specifically doing, that you're pouring that creative force actually into. And how it passes from one channel to another, like whether it ends up coming out in what you're saying is a wet dream, or whether it ends up transcending into another area. There has been times where you can even, you know, since we're getting personal about this, that you'll think that you actually had an orgasm or actually ejaculation, but there won't be anything there, but you can actually even feel that it's there. And I'll make that very clear that, hey, I can't explain this yet, but a male can ejaculate and there had been nothing that came out, like physically, but you can feel that there's actually something that is there. It's like the energy itself was ejaculated, but not the actual, the physical fluid itself. I just wanted to make sure we cover this entire subject.
That's exactly what was happening to me. Yeah, because that was exactly what was happening. It's like it's that there's something there, but it's not actually happening.
Yeah, and what they say is that, you know, again, you know, planets are merging at this stage, so, you know, stay tuned for next week and what more it reveals, but that basically that this is the foreground to the homunculus, which is the golden lotus. So it's basically that in this same vein of knowledge that talks about the seminal retention, it actually talks about what the goal of this is. And these books, you know, I have to, when you see my book thing, like it's a lot. Like I have to figure out how to get that back online and not go to jail trying to do it. But maybe we could put in like a private library. But there's one book that speaks deep about this. It's like an old Chinese book. And what they're basically saying, you know, once you get the gist of what's being talked about, is that the last stage of this Buddhahood, but not necessarily the Buddha that they write about right now, but the art of the Buddha, is that the Buddha starts replicating itself to where it becomes completely surrounded by golden versions of itself. And that what these golden versions are is that, and I'm glad we got into this conversation because it allows me to tie things up really like I wanted to in this conversation, because this had to be a deep dive. So let me just give it to you like how it really is, and no philosophies at all. So there is like an energy, a feminine force that is on the planet that is actually more corresponds to wet dreams, okay? And this has always been seen as more or less the Lilithian force, which has been known in occultism to steal children. And many took that a little too far with actually thinking that it had to do with her physically stealing children out of a crib that were born. But it was actually directly related to that she would impregnate herself from the semen of men's wet dreams, okay? And this was very known about. This was like, you know, if you was born back in the old days, everybody knew that this was going on. And there were things that you would do from time to time in order to try to keep this from happening. And I don't want to get into that so much because then it's like getting one thing versus the other. I just want to talk about the overall benefits of when one could get beyond this stage of self. Because what they do say, though, is what attracts her is things like pornography, things that like basically put you into that aspect of yourself until you graduate. It's literally like something that you graduate. And then even pornography and naked pictures and all sorts of stuff don't bring that force back into being able to have that kind of activity, right? But all this is like, let's say, a ladder. So let me just lay it dry. So what happens is that, or wet in this case. So what happens is that, so this energy is said to create children from this energy. And she has like these kids from pretty much every man that has had these ejaculations, and that priests were always trying to prevent this from happening to them, because they were like the ones that she was going after the most, because they were the ones that were the most sexually oppressed, if you may, and had the most semen cultivated, right? So then Solomon was the only one, and Solomon in this case being a cognate in itself, some kind of code or program from a large bank of knowledge and memories that have been long forgotten. But Solomon cracks this in the Song of Solomon by explaining that there's also another bride, that once one can overcome the first force, which I used to actually see in the dream, like when I was lucid, and I would go into every dream lucid for a while, as I explained before, that this being would appear first. And she was always like the best looking chick that you can think of, dressed in the best seductive clothes that you can think of. And everything was just overwhelming about her energy as far as seduction. And I had a choice. Either I could go with her and have the greatest time you could ever think of, because it's also in the astral plane, or I could go to door number 2, and I would never know what was behind door number 2. So it was literally saying, when I cracked this in my mind, because you've got to realize a lot of this stuff is happening in your mind, and it's disguising itself as images and pictures and all this kind of stuff, but really it's a function of the consciousness that is trying to get you to understand about yourself, that you could take the one where you already know what's going to happen. That's really how it was presented. You already know what's going to happen. You're going to go with her. You're going to have this great time. You're going to ejaculate. Then it's going to be over. Or you can go behind this other door and you don't even know what's going to happen in there. Mystical stuff happens in there. But you have to have the willpower to go to the door that you don't know what's going to happen. And this was always taking place in the onset of my lucid dreams. I actually couldn't get completely lucid, which I would call breaking the dream. I couldn't get completely lucid until I would have to make that choice. And this is just me personally. I don't think everyone goes through this, but I think a lot of us probably do. And so spiritual wisdom revealed that, so in the Song of Solomon, he's writing to this other force. And this other force was known as basically the Shekinah, was known as Sophia, was known as the bride, was known as the virgin. She was more of chaste and pious. So this particular being would never come to a man that had lascivious ideas and had like women, lots of women and things that he was engaged with. And this woman was known as wisdom. Now that's why this knowledge is kind of multi-layered, because even in one context, it's saying that wisdom never really finds itself in the mind of a man who is still thinking of the vulgarities of everything, right? But then also it's saying that you also have to kind of go through this courtship process of being able to get wisdom to now rest on you like a dove. This is basically the Venusian initiation. And that's why I find this is all strange that it's coming up at this point. So in this case, that many would tarry, meaning that they would actually go for prolonged periods of fasts, whatever those kind of fasts were, in order to receive this Holy Ghost, which was the bride. And in this tarrying process, the only thing that you really practiced was an aesthetic of purifying yourself, just purifying the consciousness, purifying the mind. And that in this stage of continuous purity, that she would become more and more attracted to you. And again, this could be seen in different levels. She would become more and more attracted until she allowed you to take her on as a bride. And then once that happened, you would gain this consciousness that, and I can speak from experience, that always shows up. Like at its most prevalent at around 3 a.m. And it's all wise. It just knows everything about everything and just keeps talking about every single thing that you need to know. and it never forsakes you. And this is interesting because it talks about, again, as it calls it, the counselor, and it says that the counselor will never forsake you. And so what it's basically saying is that once you get to a certain stage of leveling up in your consciousness and realizing, you know, how you're entreating certain things and energies with your body, and then you seek to actually, you know, get really into a relationship with wisdom, once it rests on you, it never leaves. Just like in a real relationship with a real bride, no matter what you went through or did or happened after that, that wisdom and knowledge will always be with you. And it was always seen as an achievement that every man should try to go for in their life in order to obtain this bride. And that was the Song of Solomon. That's the decryption of what the Song of Solomon is actually all about. So in conclusion, I think that we're getting a little bit deeper here. So Patty's question. So what happens when this is going on with a woman? What we have to learn in all of this is that the human body is actually androgynous. So the same thing that is happening for the male, even if it's like flipped inside out, is also happening for the female. So I would assume for sure that there is just like there's a Abraham and there's a Saraswati. There's also, let's say, the Sophia, and then there's the masculine aspect of what Sophia would be. So these divine virtues, if you may, are in themselves achievements that like can be reached if one chooses to take certain paths. Now, I think the wrong thing to do here would be to insist that everyone has to do this. But the best thing that we could attain from this is knowing that it's like one of those things that's like a vase on the shelf that's glowing and sparkling. If one can go through the proper sequences in order to achieve it, then they would have a great reward. And you yourself, you're actually on that path, and you've already seen the benefits. You've also seen the other side of it. You've seen what happens when you continuously would pour forth your essence without restraint, right? And you see how also, because this is what they're saying also that you should learn, and these are metaphors about the Lilithian force, which is that it will drain completely. It will basically kill you. Like it will keep trying to drink, also like somewhat of a vampire or a night hag. And I'm sure people give these kind of titles and names around it because it can get that serious. So they're going to try to paint the biggest, wraith, this is a wraith that's draining all your energy. And that's really happening, but it's also a part of lessons and powers and energies that we're to come to realize these are the sequences of life. So that way, when our son comes to us and says, well, Dad, this is what's happening to me, wherever lesson he chooses or whatever path he chooses to go, basically whatever womb he chooses to be with at that stage, he's not unaware of what exactly is going on. So that way, when he reaches that drain point, like, okay, I can't sleep with Celine anymore, I need to wake up to Isis or whatever they call it, that one knows what that actually is and knows what actions to make. It's like, okay, now I gotta back off of this kind of life. It's just like my father said. And that's what we're really looking to restore here, is not removing our children. And I remember this very clearly, and is not basically removing the possibilities of this even happening, because I don't think that that's really what you want to do. I think what you want to do, though, is put the proper tutorials around it. So that way, when stuff starts happening, there's a greater level of clarity of what is causing that and how to move on from it. And so I would for sure say that now is the greatest time for you, because you're standing in the face of your resolve. And just like any man that actually would be a bit more weaker against seduction, because seduction is a very powerful force. They talk about seduction on the spiritual plane and how it's overcome many. But really, instead of seeing it as like a biblical straitjacket, more of seeing it as things that you need to understand how to configure in your consciousness, and that these are the characters that are being used in order to get you to become aware of that. Because then when you become aware of that, you gain a power. That's one of the siddhas. So you gain this power, and you've gained that power through the real lessons and experiences that it takes for you to actually become aware of what's going on and what you're doing. And that's exactly what we talked about the other day. And actually a few times since we've had the last conversations about our gifts, and that we never truly know how to use our gifts until we're put into a situation where we don't have them. And now we have to learn step by step, you know, like even with the semen itself, how precious the semen really is. I'm sure you're going to realize more and more of the different things that can actually be done with it. Obviously, it seems to even function somewhat as a bargaining chip. Sometimes men that actually have been able to cultivate more of their spiritual force seem to attract other essences around them. And in that form of attraction, and this is, of course, now you're seeing even a male aspect acting out in its female stage, but even in that attraction goes into a courtship. So this is like the male playing hard to get with its energy in order to attract a better relationship on its feminine side. And then make no mistake, what then happens at some point, as Solomon even admitted, is that this becomes physical, like meaning that a physical person shows up that actually becomes the cognate of exactly what you've been able to achieve on the spiritual plane in that connection. Some people call that the twin flame. They call that the one that but it started in another space. And that's why some people that are trying to find the twin flame, like literally looking on apps and, you know, going out to clubs, and it will never happen that way. It happens from within. And then once it's fully manifested within, then it comes outside. Then you see the person and all of a sudden it hits off from there. And that's, of course, if that's in the line and the path of where one is going with their projections. So, you know, I definitely know that we all have gotten into the depths of how this all works today. And, you know me, I could keep going, but I definitely wanted to give us time to breathe with this. I wanted to look really briefly at these power notes that I had. I'm still compiling over here as we're still dealing with some stuff where I'm trying to find more information. I had some charts on some seasonal aspects of different herbs and how really all of the elements that are in nature can be put into 4 categories based on their temperaments. And that was actually discovered by some guys doing some extensive CBD research. So they created a chart, but it's mapped out to the weeds. So I was like, I was going to drop it right in the chat, but they were like, man, they're going to think I'm just talking about weeds. Because on the outside, they were showing how they blend all of these different kind of marijuanas and cannabis plants. I can call them that, not weeds, but all these different cannabis plants based on these 4 seasonal temperaments, which are like spicy, what you would call sweet, you know, but those 4 temperaments, and then beginning to spread it out from there through all the herbs, lemons, citruses, etc., and figuring out, you know, where those 4 poles within the energy that is coming from the elements and the plants, etc. I want to look at this really quick. So just remember some recapping here. Do you play cards well? Like, you're going to play the cards that you're dealt. You know, like coming back into this and actually feeling like you want to throw the hand in, that's not an option. What our ancestors were the best at doing was they were really good card players. So it didn't matter really what you were dealt. Even if they got something that they felt like wasn't a good hand, notice they always call that your hand. Like if you got dealt what you would think is a bad hand, that was all based on the card player. And many challenged themselves to see if they could start off with what you would see as almost nothing and then achieve everything. Because the interesting thing is nothing is actually more closer to everything than having some stuff is, if you really think about it. So the last things here is, let me see, strong situations or energies. Just remember that. The reason why we keep recollecting a lot of times situations that happen is a whole sequence of things that goes on in the brain. I don't want you to forget. So you make that, if you forget about that time, it's going to happen to us again. And remember, this is coming from a voice that wants to survive. It is an energy. It was created. But now you have to actually put it in its proper place. And that means to put things in their proper place sometimes. Remember, I just told you earlier about the power check. Sometimes you have to air them out. You still will be there, but you don't have the same position in the role that you had in my mind, constantly reminding me of the bad things and all that. I'm restoring that with the greatness, stuff that happened to me. I love that time. Go back as far as possible. Remember, the further you go back, the more condensed and pure the energy actually is. And you're just keeping massive fuel canisters that way of energy that is going to be truly useful to you as you keep going in this exploration, because you're diving deep. So just remember, we have strong emotional triggers that sometimes get that stuff going. So you need an arsenal of great thoughts and situations to keeping that thing balanced. I want to speak tomorrow towards the soulless myth that is now traversing the conscious community. I will actually get into that right now because yeah, it's just not necessary. I'll be just dropping some knowledge in because it was asked and I didn't cover the question to the completeness of what the energies is saying that I should have also said about that situation. So I'll be revisiting that. Also remembering about our playfulness and make-believe and, you know, being all outside of yourself, judging yourself, not allowing yourself to have fun and, you know, straight jacketing yourself. You got to remember, like, we breathe in, we breathe out. There's one aspect where we do things to ourselves in order to get ourselves more tightened up, get your discipline together, all those kind of things. But you also got to remember that's one pole. So if you're making yourself unhappy all the time, you're not being able to eat anything, go anywhere, do something, or all of that because you're working on this spiritual thing. That is true, but you got to know if you've worked too much on the seclusion and too much on the, you know, I'm going to punish the body so that way it can get a reward. Just realize that's what you're really doing. Astringent, I'm going on this fast. I'm going to deny myself of these things because when I'm done with that, I will feel like I deserve this reward. And this reward could be lucid dreaming. This reward could be a better job, whatever. But also remember how this really works is that if you were able to accomplish that within your consciousness right away, you know, which is adepthood. Don't take what I'm saying as if you don't need to be disciplined and you don't need to go on your cleanses. And like I said, even before, the vegetarian diet, that you don't need to stay on that and make sure you're cleansing your body because you were on processed foods. Like, all of this needs to be taken into context of a person who is aware of knowledge and wisdom, which you are. Lastly, realizing that this is exploration time. 2020 is a big exploration year for us. We'll be surprised what is revealed. Lots of stuff coming up about these adjacent planets. Also remember certain alignments taking place, if somebody can actually figure out that alignment between Earth, the Sun, Venus, and Mercury, and when that's going to happen again. I'd be interested in that. I'd also be interested in when it happened before, so I can reverse engineer the times and then go and see what else was going on those days, because Shekinah is a very powerful force. Remember that even the US military is admitted that it exists. That became their, what they call shock and awe, but it was really a Hebrew word, and it's a reference to Shekinah because, in conclusion, Sophia is also seen as some type of guardian or protector, which we always seem to find with many of the very deep female energies of wisdom, is that they're very Amazonian in the natures of that they possess so much power that armies are easily vanquished. Like, as far as physical threats and all that are easily vanquished. So many in occult history, of course, have always tried to use the symbolism of justice, Lady Justice. Those are the balances, that's Mayat. And any of the Amazonians, even if it's down to Wonder Woman or the Statue of Liberty, in order to have as a symbol of protection, because that's where that force comes from on the physical plane. So, wholeness and balance vibration. I trust that there was a lot to grow from this. We can probably take this apart a little bit more. I'll get the archive up. We've been actually pretty on point with getting things. We're actually bringing all the meditations around from Mark. There's a lot there. Brother's done extensive work, you know, what we could say for sure. He gets the consistency reward on those meditations and driving in that space. And also we have obviously our sister Wijby and her womb meditations. You know, we have tribe vibes. And, you know, we have lots of material still in the archives. Also, we posted vegetarianism, that 3-part series, if you may. And yeah, and so we're still driving into this and continuously listening to what is coming forth and perfecting ourselves. So I'll have some stuff to share early next week about things that or courses that you can listen to that won't be directly mine per se, but others that are very, very polished in understanding how to navigate the quadrants of the brain a bit more on a practical level, or actually in practical and metaphysical level, to understand just the stages of what can be missed sometimes with what we experienced in the past and how that's affecting us right now and how that's affecting our thinking. So I'm compiling that data now. And so that's what's up, tribe. I guess this is that wholeness and balance vibrations time. It's 8:44. We jumped in here at 6. It was a blur. I didn't even sweat too much. Last time I was kind of creamed over. Looking good still. Sit in love and wholeness to the family.
Wholeness.
Wholeness, family.
Wholeness.
Love.
Wholeness.
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 Put your head in there.
Wholeness, family.
Wholeness.
Uh-oh, I turned it off.
Wholeness.
Y'all brothers on that journey, I'll see you on the other side. Hey, what's up? What's up? Is that your son over there, Marie?
Yeah,
It's talking to me? You?
Marie. Say Marie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my son.
Oh,
That's
wow.
my youngest.
Hey. All right, your youngest. Wholeness.
Wholeness. Wholeness.
Oh, wow, that's powerful. That's beautiful. All right, tribe, until we jump in this thing again, you know, let's keep our explorations going. And just remember, nothing's off limits. If you got something you want to bring forth, you know, we're going to keep stretching the space open and discussing things. And we want to see just us, you know, I know a lot of stuff that I haven't actually talked about. There just haven't been a space for it. And, you know, it also has to synchronize right. But I feel like we're going into a time where we get an opportunity to really just go in, as they say, just go in, like, forget it, unapologetically, here's what's going on. And we'd be surprised at how many of us are actually experiencing similar things.